Hey there, tonight we're diving into the grueling world of ancient Egyptian quarries. Not the romanticized adventure you might imagine, but a back-breaking reality where each stone block tells tales of sweat and survival. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now settle in, maybe turn on some white noise or grab your favorite blanket, and let's drift into tonight's story together. So, you've woken up in the land of pharaohs, and today your destiny is carved in stone, literally. You're about to spend a day in an ancient Egyptian quarry, where the only thing more relentless than the sun is the work itself. It's dawn, and the horizon is already a swirling canvas of reds and oranges over Aswan, one of the key quarry sites where Egyptians extracted the granite for their monumental ambitions. Forget your snooze button here. Time isn't measured by the chime of a clock, but by the inexorable march of the sun across the sky. In ancient Egypt, keeping time was a sunlit affair. They didn't have wristwatches or digital clocks, no surprise there. But they did have shadow clocks and water clocks, which sounds pretty high-tech for 2500 BCE. The shadow clock, or sundial, was divided into 12 parts, meaning your workday was neatly split into hours. But let's not kid ourselves. An hour could stretch or shrink depending on the season. So your complaint about working overtime isn't going to fly here. You're not alone in this quarry of dreams, or rather nightmares. The place is buzzing with activity, and you're part of a sizable crew. The laborers are the heart of this operation, the ones who actually do the back-breaking work of chiseling away at these stubborn stones. Skilled craftsmen, on the other hand, are the rock stars of this world, quite literally chiseling out their place in history with every swing of the mallet. And then there are the overseers, those ever-watchful eyes making sure the pharaoh's deadline is met. No pressure, right? Now, let's talk geography. You're standing in Aswan, a site famous for its granite, a rock so hard it makes your average countertop look like a marshmallow. This granite was the cherry on top of Egypt's architectural sundae, used to cap pyramids and create colossal statues that screamed were a big deal to anyone within a 500-mile radius. Meanwhile, Tura near Cairo was known for its fine limestone, used in the casing stones that gave the pyramids their iconic gleam. These quarries were the ancient world's Home Depot, but with a lot more sweat and a lot less air conditioning. As you look around, you might think, this doesn't look like a good career move. And you'd be right. The logistics of running a quarry were as complex as any modern mega-project. Transporting stone blocks weighing up to 60 tons required a combination of manpower, ingenuity, and sheer stubbornness. They used sledges and ropes, lubricating the sand with water to reduce friction, a nifty ancient hack. But let's face it, this was no joyride. If you thought your morning commute was bad, try hauling a multi-ton block across the desert. The labor force in these quarries wasn't a group of cheerful volunteers. Many were conscripted peasants working off their taxes in a system that sounds suspiciously like indentured servitude. Others were drafted during the inundation season when the Nile flooded the fields, turning farmers into temporary stone shifters. Skilled craftsmen, however, were a notch above. They were trained artisans whose work was driven by precision and artistry. Not that their lives were cushy, mind you, but let's not get swept away by the romantic notion of craftsmen lovingly chiseling each stone with artistic flair. The reality was closer to a relentless grind, with strict quotas and even stricter overseers. And speaking of overseers, these guys were the middle management types, making sure everything ran smoother than a well-oiled chariot wheel. Their job was to ensure that no one slacked off and that the pharaoh's grand visions stayed on schedule. They may not have had email, but they sure had ways to make you wish you were somewhere else. Why did all this matter? Well, Egypt's monumental architecture was a physical manifestation of divine kingship. The pyramids, obelisks, and temples weren't just stone structures. They were propaganda pieces, showing off the might and glory of the pharaoh. Ensuring these projects were completed on time and with precision was a matter of state pride, if not survival. The pharaohs had a vested interest in keeping the gods, and by extension their people, happy. So as you stand there, chisel in hand, you're not just a cog in a machine. You're part of a grand cosmic scheme. You're shaping the stones that will shape history. But before you get too carried away with grandiosity, remember that the sun is climbing higher, and your hands are already blistering. Welcome to the quarry, a place where the sweat is real, the stakes are high, and the only thing grander than the stones is the ambition behind them. And just like that, with the sun climbing higher in the sky, the reality of quarry life hits you like a stone hammer to the thumb. You've got your chisel in hand and a massive block of granite in front of you. There's no turning back. The romantic vision of being an ancient craftsman, meticulously shaping stone with artistic finesse, is quickly replaced by the brutal truth. This is a feat of endurance, not artistry. Forget the precision of a sculptor. Today, you're more like a human jackhammer. Let's talk tools of the trade, shall we? Ever heard of Dalarite balls? No, they're not the latest fitness craze. They're ancient Egypt's answer to your trusty sledgehammer. Picture bowling balls, but made of rock, and you're halfway there. These were used to pound away at the granite, breaking off chunks with each swing. Imagine swinging one of these for hours under the relentless sun. Makes your kettlebell workout look like a warm-up, doesn't it? The chisels, on the other hand, were made of copper. And if you think copper sounds a bit too soft for the job, you'd be right. These chisels needed constant sharpening, adding another layer to your already exhausting day. While we're on the subject of exhausting, let's not ignore the stats. It's estimated that on-the-job injuries in these quarries were as common as grains of sand in the desert. Cuts, bruises, and broken bones were part of the occupational hazards. And forget about OSHA regulations. The only safety net here was the hope that you'd avoid a direct hit from a wayward hammer. The odds of injury were high, but so was the pressure to keep working. Ever wonder why ancient Egyptians were so keen on mummification? Maybe it was because they spent half their lives dodging workplace hazards. Now, if you're thinking, I lift weights at the gym, I could handle this, let me stop you right there. Lifting a dumbbell isn't quite the same as smashing a Dalarite ball against granite for hours on end. The average stone block these workers dealt with weighed tens of tons. Imagine dragging that across the desert, all while the overseer makes sure you're not slacking off. It's less cross-fit, and more cross your fingers you don't collapse. As the sun reaches its zenith, you're probably wishing for a break. But in the world of ancient Egypt, break times were as rare as a cool breeze in the desert. You get a moment to gulp down some water and maybe munch on a bit of bread and onions. Not exactly the protein shake you might be used to, but hey, carbs are carbs, right? This was your fuel for the day, and you'd need every bit of it to keep swinging, chiseling, and hauling. But let's not get too bogged down in the doom and gloom. The truth is, these laborers were part of something bigger than themselves. They were building monuments that would stand the test of time, quite literally. The stones they carved would become the backbone of Egypt's greatest architectural achievements. There's a certain romance in that, even if the reality is less rosy. Imagine telling your future grandkids, see that giant pyramid? I helped make that. It's the kind of legacy that makes even the most grueling work seem worthwhile. Economically speaking, these quarries were vital to Egypt's economy. The stones extracted here were not just used for local projects, but were also traded with neighboring regions, making them an essential part of Egypt's wealth and influence. The laborers, craftsmen, and overseers were all cogs in a vast machine that powered the empire. The demand for stone was enormous, and the pressure to meet that demand was equally so. Politically, these quarries were as much about power as they were about stone. The pharaohs knew that monumental architecture was propaganda in its most literal form. Every obelisk, every temple, every monument was a testament to their divine right to rule. The stones you were chiseling today were part of that narrative, a story told in granite and limestone, designed to awe and inspire. So, while you're drenched in sweat, covered in dust, and nursing blisters, remember that you're not just shaping stone. You're shaping history. But don't get too carried away with grandiosity just yet. The sun's still high, your day's far from over, and the stones aren't going to carve themselves. Welcome to the grind, where every swing of the hammer is a testament to human endurance, ambition, and let's face it, stubbornness. As the sun beats down, you finally get that much-needed pause in the relentless grind. But let's not get too excited. If you're picturing a serene picnic under a shade tree, think again. This is ancient Egypt, not a Tuscan vineyard. It's time for the midday meal, but it's less banquet and more bare bones. Forget the lavish feasts of Cleopatra and the pharaohs. You're not dining on stuffed dormice or honey cakes. Your menu is strictly proletarian, more bread and onions than ambrosia and nectar. Welcome to the reality of ancient Egyptian sustenance, where your midday break involves gnawing on a chunk of bread that could double as a building material. This isn't your soft, fluffy artisan loaf. It's dense and tough, likely filled with enough grit to polish a statue. The bread was a staple, made from emmer wheat or barley, the ancient grains that fueled Egypt's economy and its laborers. And let's not forget the piece de resistance, onions. Yes, onions were the Gouda vegetable, adding a bit of flavor, or at least a sharp kick, to your otherwise bland diet. Think of them as the original breath mints, in the sense that they made sure everyone kept their distance. Quarry workers' meals were washed down with beer, but don't get too excited. This wasn't the hoppy craft brew that you might sip on a lazy Sunday afternoon. Ancient Egyptian beer was more like a thick, porridge-like brew, nutritious, but not exactly refreshing. It was essentially liquid bread, providing the carbs and calories needed to keep swinging those Dalarite balls. And while that might sound unappealing, remember that water safety was iffy at best. Beer offered a safer, and let's admit, slightly more enjoyable, alternative to quenching your thirst. But what about the myth of Egyptian abundance and eternal feasts? While it's true that the elite feasted like gods, the average worker was as far from a royal banquet as you are from winning the lottery. The images of endless bounty depicted in tomb paintings were more aspiration than reality for most. They were like Instagram influencers of the ancient world, presenting an idealized version of life that most could only dream of. Yet, even in the harsh conditions of the quarry, these meager meals served a purpose. They were the fuel that kept Egypt's monumental machine running. Speaking of machines, let's talk compensation. You might not get paid in gold coins or precious gems, but in a system that could best be described as you work, you eat. Rations were the currency of the realm. Workers received their daily bread, literally, as part of their wages, along with other essentials like oil and fish. There were no direct deposits or paychecks here. This was a barter economy, and sustenance was the name of the game. Laborers also received clothing and shelter as part of their compensation, although shelter might be a generous term. Imagine cramped, mud-brick barracks, and you'll get the idea. Your digs were basic but functional, providing a place to rest your weary body after a day of non-stop hammering. In a society where survival was often a day-to-day struggle, these provisions were a lifeline. The socio-economic dynamics of ancient Egypt were as complex as the hieroglyphs that decorated temple walls. You, as a laborer, were at the bottom of a hierarchy that stretched from the lowliest worker to the divine Pharaoh himself. But everyone played their part in this grand societal tapestry. The labor you put into the quarries helped build not just the pyramids and temples, but the very economy that sustained the empire. The quarry workers were part of a workforce that was mobilized not just by economic necessity, but by a sense of duty to the state. In a land where the Pharaoh was a living god, your work was a form of worship. Each stone you helped extract was an offering to the divine, a piece of a larger puzzle that, when completed, would ensure the continued favor of the gods. The grandeur of the monuments was a testament to the labor of countless hands, each chisel mark a prayer in stone. The broader economic picture was equally fascinating. These quarries were the bedrock, quite literally, of Egypt's economic might. Stone wasn't just a building material. It was a trading commodity, shipped along the Nile and beyond. The demand for Egyptian stone was high, and its extraction was critical to maintaining the empire's wealth and influence. The stones you helped carve out of the earth were more than just construction materials. They were currency in a trade network that stretched across the ancient world. Politically, the quarries were a testament to the pharaoh's power and reach. Each block of stone was a political statement, a demonstration of the ability to marshal resources and labor on an unprecedented scale. The monuments built from these stones were not just architectural wonders. They were declarations of divine authority, visible for miles around, and intended to project power both domestically and to foreign lands. As you sit there, munching on your gritty bread and sipping your porridge-like beer, it's easy to feel like just another cog in the machine. But in reality, you're part of something much bigger. The sweat and toil of the quarry workers were the foundation upon which the glory of ancient Egypt was built. It's a bit of a romantic notion, isn't it? The idea that your hard work contributes to something magnificent and enduring. But let's not get too lost in the romance. The sun's still high, and the stones are waiting. Your break is over, and it's time to get back to shaping history one grueling swing at a time. And just like that, your brief respite is over. The sun's still blazing, the stones aren't going to move themselves, and the afternoon shift is calling. As you heft your chisel and head back to the grind, let's tackle one of the biggest misconceptions about this ancient labor force. The notion that it was primarily composed of slaves. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. Sure, the idea that the pyramids were built by legions of enslaved workers is a captivating story. After all, who doesn't love a good underdog tale of human endurance against oppressive masters? But the reality is as nuanced as an Egyptian mural. While there certainly were slaves in ancient Egypt, the labor force in the quarries was primarily made up of conscripted peasants, skilled artisans, and seasonal workers. These folks were more like the gig economy of the ancient world, only instead of delivering your pad thai, they were delivering tons of stone. And let's talk skilled artisanship, shall we? These weren't just any workers. They were the creme de la creme of stone carvers, trained in techniques that were handed down through generations. The craftsmen were the unsung heroes of this Herculean effort, transforming rough blocks into the finely detailed components of temples and monuments. Their work was judged not just by human eyes, but by those of the gods, or so they believed. Messing up wasn't just a career risk, it was a cosmic faux pas. But why all the fuss over stones, you ask? Well, these weren't just any rocks. They were symbols of eternity, chosen for their durability to ensure that the pharaoh's legacy would outlast even the sands of time. Each block was a testament to divine kingship, a physical manifestation of the ruler's power and godly status. So, when you were chiseling away, you were essentially etching the pharaoh's immortality into the earth. No pressure. Let's dive into the logistics, because getting these behemoths from quarry to construction site was no small feat. Imagine moving a 60-ton block with a bunch of ropes and a sled, often over miles of unforgiving terrain. No cranes, no forklifts, just manpower and a lot of ingenuity. Workers would haul these stones on wooden sledges, lubricating the sand with water to reduce friction. It was a colossal group effort, a testament to human stubbornness and teamwork that rivals any modern-day engineering project. So, while you're out here sweating under the sun, it's worth remembering that this wasn't just labor for labor's sake. The stones you're chiseling had a destination, grandeur. They were destined to become part of the architectural wonders that would awe both contemporaries and future generations. The Great Pyramid of Giza, for instance, was not just a tomb. It was a statement of divine authority and a challenge to time itself. A modern romantic vision might paint these workers as noble craftsmen, but the reality was a bit grittier. Sure, the artisans had skills that would make any sculptor envious, but their lives were anything but glamorous. They worked under tight deadlines, with overseers breathing down their necks. The pressure was immense, not just to meet quotas, but to ensure that the divine message of the pharaoh was conveyed precisely in stone. Now, let's zoom out for a moment and look at the broader context. These quarries were more than just stone extraction sites. They were the backbone of Egypt's monumental economy. The stones were not just for local consumption, but were also traded with neighboring states, making them a cornerstone of Egypt's wealth and influence. The demand for quality stone was a driving force in the economy, and the quarries were a critical part of this supply chain. Politically, the stakes were just as high. The pharaohs knew that monumental architecture was more than just a display of wealth. It was a tool of governance and a declaration of divine right. Each stone block was a building block of propaganda, a message carved in granite and limestone that said, "We are here, and we are eternal." The sheer scale of these projects was a testament to the centralized power of the state. But let's not kid ourselves. A lot of this was about image. The pharaohs weren't just building for the gods. They were building for their peers, creating legacies that would outshine their predecessors and intimidate their rivals. It was an ancient arms race, but instead of nuclear warheads, they had obelisks and pyramids. So, as you wipe the sweat from your brow and return to the relentless rhythm of hammer and chisel, remember that you're not just carving stone, you're carving history. You're part of a grand narrative that spans millennia, a story written in the very earth beneath your feet. It's a legacy of ambition, endurance, and a bit of madness, all rolled into one. But enough of the philosophical musings. The sun's still high in the sky, and those stones aren't moving themselves. It's back to the grind, back to shaping the future one swing at a time. Just remember, the monuments you're helping to create will stand long after today's blisters have healed. And as the afternoon wears on, you can take a small comfort in knowing that your toil isn't just for today, it's for eternity. As the shadows stretch across the quarry and the sun dips towards the horizon, you can finally pause and take stock of the day's toil. Your muscles are screaming, your hands are raw, and you're pretty sure you've inhaled enough dust to build your own pyramid. But here, in the fading light of day, you get a moment to reflect on the legacy you're helping to create. A legacy that's been romanticized, mythologized, and let's be honest, often misunderstood. Now, let's dismantle the myth that these workers were just nameless cogs in a grand machine, slaves with chisels. Far from it. Archaeological evidence, like the workers' village discovered at Giza, shows that these laborers weren't just crammed into makeshift huts. They had organized settlements with bakeries, breweries, and even medical care. Talk about a comprehensive benefits package. The workers were compensated with food, beer, and a sense of purpose. A far cry from the slave narrative that Hollywood loves to sell. These workers were often peasants fulfilling their tax obligations or craftsmen honing their skills. Their work was hard, but it was also a source of pride. Imagine being part of a project that would define an entire civilization. It's like being in the original "We Built This City" music video, minus the synth pop and questionable fashion choices. And while the pharaohs got all the credit, it was the sweat and skill of these laborers that truly brought the monuments to life. Let's zoom out and consider the broader socio-political dynamics at play. The monuments weren't just about leaving a mark on history. They were about maintaining the social order. The pyramids and temples were physical manifestations of divine kingship, reinforcing the idea that the pharaoh was a god on earth. These structures weren't just tombs. They were propaganda, carved from the very earth, declaring the pharaoh's power and divine right to rule. But what about the human cost? The grandeur of these monuments came at a hefty price. The laborers faced grueling conditions, with injuries as abundant as grains of sand on the Nile's banks. The mortality rate was high, and those who didn't survive became part of the quarry's eternal history. Yet, in a society that viewed the afterlife as a continuation of this world, their sacrifices weren't seen as futile. They were part of a cosmic balance, ensuring the prosperity of the nation in both this life and the next. Now, let's address the allure of the romantic narrative. The idea of thousands of workers laboring under a blazing sun, united in a common purpose, is undeniably compelling. It's the stuff of legends, of epic tales passed down through generations. But the reality was far less glamorous. The work was brutal, the conditions harsh, and the rewards often intangible. Yet, despite the hardships, there was a camaraderie among the workers, a shared sense of purpose that transcended the daily grind. The legacy of these laborers is etched in stone, quite literally. The pyramids of Giza, the temples of Karnak, the obelisks that dotted the landscape, all are testaments to their skill and perseverance. These structures have stood the test of time, enduring for millennia as symbols of human achievement. They remind us of the enduring power of collective effort and the indomitable spirit of the workers who carved their place in history. And let's not forget the economic implications. These monumental projects were not just about showcasing power. They were economic engines that fueled the Egyptian economy. The quarries provided employment, stimulated trade, and created a demand for goods and services. The stones extracted from the earth were not just building materials. They were commodities traded across the ancient world, contributing to Egypt's wealth and influence. As the sun sets and the stars begin to twinkle in the sky, it's time to ponder the true cost of glory. The pharaohs achieved immortality through their monuments, but it was the laborers who paid the price. Their toil was the foundation upon which the empire was built, and their legacy, though often overshadowed, is no less significant. So, as you stand there, covered in dust, and contemplating your place in this grand narrative, remember that you're part of a story that spans millennia. Your day in the quarry may be over, but the impact of your work will endure long after the sun has set. It's a legacy as enduring as the stones themselves, a testament to human ambition, resilience, and the relentless pursuit of greatness. In the end, the towering legacy of the pharaohs is a reflection of the countless individuals who labored in their service. Their stories, though often untold, are as integral to history as the monuments they built. So, as you head back to your humble quarters, take a moment to appreciate the sweat and sacrifice that shaped the world as we know it. a world where the past is always present, carved in stone and remembered in the echoes of history. If you've ever marveled at the color purple and wondered why it was once the shade of emperors, you might owe a nod to the Phoenicians. These folks, who thrived from around 1500 BCE until their eventual fade into historical obscurity, were the Mediterranean's original sailors of fortune. They didn't just stumble upon fame and fortune, they practically invented it, one sea voyage at a time. Nestled along what we now call the Lebanese coast, Phoenician cities, like Tyre, Sidon, and Byblos, were perfectly positioned to become the Las Vegas of ancient seafaring. The geography was their wingman, with the coastline offering natural harbors that practically waved ships in like an air traffic controller having a good day. But the real kicker, they had cedar trees thicker than a Roman legionnaire's ego. These trees, abundant and sturdy, were the perfect raw material for building ships that could withstand the salty tantrums of the sea. Now, let's talk about the so-called Purple Empire. The name makes it sound like they were ruling over some kind of royal utopia, draped in luxurious violet tapestries. In reality, though, the Phoenicians were more like the scrappy startup founders of antiquity, hustling their way across the Mediterranean. They weren't conquering lands with armies. They were conquering minds with trade and innovation. The purple part, oh, that comes down to their knack for extracting Tyrian purple dye from the murex snail, a process so laborious and pungent that it could make a medieval alchemist's workshop seem like a walk in the park. It took about 10,000 snails to produce a single gram of dye, which was worth its weight in gold. Talk about a slimy business model. But just how glamorous was it, really, to be a seafaring Phoenician? Imagine spending weeks on a wooden boat with no Wi-Fi, powered by a combination of wind and sheer desperation. The reality was more deadliest catch than lifestyles of the rich and famous. Yet, these maritime maestros weren't just peddling purple dye. They were the Amazon prime of their day, shipping goods like timber, glass, and wine across the known world. They made waves, literally and metaphorically, by establishing trade routes that stretched from Cyprus to Carthage, and even as far as the Iberian Peninsula. Sure, the romantic notion of the dauntless sailor exploring uncharted waters has its appeal. But let's not forget the harsh truth. The seas were as unpredictable as a Game of Thrones plot twist. Between rogue waves, pirate ambushes, and the occasional kraken, or more realistically, a giant squid, the Phoenicians had their hands full. Yet, they thrived because they turned challenges into opportunities. Phoenicians were the ultimate opportunists, always ready to barter, haggle, or trade a couple of amphorae of wine for something more exotic from far-off lands. So, next time you see something purple, think of the Phoenicians, the unsung heroes of ancient trade who built an empire not with swords or spears, but with sails and snails. They were the OG merchants of cool, navigating the treacherous waters of the Mediterranean long before it was trendy, proving that sometimes being the middleman really does pay off. Ah, the Phoenicians, true pioneers of the ancient gig economy, except instead of coding, they were building ships that could make even Poseidon envious. Let's steer into the heart of their maritime magic, where wood and water met the genius of ancient engineering. These were not your run-of-the-mill canoes. Phoenician ships were the Lamborghinis of the sea lanes. Their shipbuilding skills were no accident. This was a civilization that took innovation and slapped it onto the side of a boat. The backbone of their nautical prowess was the ubiquitous Lebanese cedar, a wood so revered that even the Egyptians couldn't resist importing it for their grandiose building projects. These trees weren't just tall, dark, and handsome. They were rot-resistant and buoyant, a shipbuilder's dream. The Phoenicians used a technique called morais and tenon, which sounds like something you'd hear from a woodworking YouTube channel, but was essentially an ancient form of IKEA assembly. This involved crafting tight-fitting joints that held the ship's planks together without a single nail in sight. Imagine the precision of that craftsmanship. It's like building a house of cards, but with much higher stakes, and no instructions manual. But let's not sail too far off course without addressing the elephant in the room, the Tyrian purple dye. One can't discuss Phoenician trade without dipping into the world of snail snot. While it's easy to romanticize this vibrant hue as the color of choice for emperors and aristocrats, the process of making it was anything but glamorous. It was a smelly, labor-intensive ordeal that involved breaking open thousands of murex snails just to extract a single ounce of the precious dye. An average tunic dyed with this purple could cost as much as 3 pounds of gold. That's a wardrobe choice that screams, "Look at me, I'm worth more than your entire village." And yet, this purple gold mine was only one piece of the Phoenician trade puzzle. They were the ultimate middlemen in a time when just browsing could get you a one-way trip to the bottom of the sea. From the timber forests of Lebanon to the olive groves of Greece, Phoenicians bought low and sold high, moving goods like glass, wine, and metals with a deftness that would make Wall Street traders blush. Their ships were floating bazaars, each one a cornucopia of ancient consumer goods that bridged cultures and economies across the Mediterranean. But how did they manage to pull off this trading coup? The Phoenicians had a knack for making friends and influencing people, a skill as valuable as gold in ancient times. They established colonies and trading posts from Cyprus to North Africa, each one a hub of commerce and cultural exchange. Cities like Carthage, which started as a Phoenician colony, became powerhouses in their own right, contributing to a network that spanned across the known world. It's like they were playing a game of Risk, but instead of armies, they were deploying merchant fleets. The Phoenician trade model was also about diversification. They weren't just pushing one product. They were the original jack of all trades. Need some Iberian silver? They've got it. Want some Cypriot copper? No problem. In the mood for some Egyptian papyrus? Step right up. This diversified portfolio ensured that the Phoenicians had their fingers in every pie, a strategy that modern economists would surely applaud. Yet, despite their dominance in trade, the Phoenicians didn't bother with the glitz and glamour of empire building. They left the land grabbing to the Assyrians and the Egyptians, preferring instead to focus on their maritime ventures. Perhaps they understood something that others didn't, that real power lay not in vast territories, but in the connections between them. The Phoenicians were the LinkedIn of the ancient world, creating a network of influence that transcended borders and outlasted empires. Of course, this isn't to say the seas were smooth sailing. The Mediterranean was a treacherous workplace, with storms and pirates as common as rush-hour traffic. Yet, the Phoenicians thrived in this chaos, their ships cutting through the waves with the precision of a surgeon. They were the adrenaline junkies of their time, embracing the unpredictability of the sea with open arms. So, as we continue to explore the legacy of these ancient mariners, let's raise a glass of Phoenician wine, naturally, to their enduring spirit. Because when it comes down to it, the Phoenicians were more than just traders. They were the architects of a world connected by commerce and culture, proving that sometimes the best way to rule an empire is to sail right through it. So, as we continue to explore the legacy of these ancient mariners, let's raise a glass of Phoenician wine, naturally, to their enduring spirit. Because when it comes down to it, the Phoenicians were more than just traders. They were the architects of a world connected by commerce and culture, proving that sometimes the best way to rule an empire is to sail right through it. But let's not drift too far without anchoring ourselves in the gritty realities of their world. The Phoenicians weren't just setting sail to see the sights. They were weaving a complex tapestry of trade routes that resembled a Mediterranean game of connect the dots. These routes stretched from the Levantine coast all the way to the Iberian Peninsula, with stops that included Cyprus, North Africa, and even the far-flung shores of modern-day Britain. Yes, you heard that right. Those ancient sailors were working the high seas all the way to the British Isles, long before anyone had heard of fish and chips. The establishment of colonies was both a strategic and economic move, like setting up franchises in key locations. Take Carthage, for example, one of their most famous colonies, founded around 814 BCE. It wasn't just a place to park their ships. It became a powerhouse in its own right, a bustling hub of trade and culture. Carthage was the New York of the ancient Mediterranean, a melting pot where Phoenician blood mixed with local customs, creating a vibrant cultural stew that was both familiar and exotic. Now, before we get too carried away romanticizing this ancient globalization with images of peaceful trade and cultural comebares, let's get real. The Phoenician sailors weren't exactly sipping lattes and forging international friendships. Life on the road or sea was tough. They faced the constant threat of pirate attacks, unpredictable weather, and let's not forget the less-than-ideal onboard amenities. We're talking about the original travel nightmares, cramped quarters, no fresh food, and a sanitation system that was best described as overboard. But let's give credit where it's due. Despite these challenges, the Phoenicians managed to create a network of trade that was as strong as their ships. They were masters of the barter system, often trading goods like glass, metals, and textiles in exchange for local products. This wasn't just about moving goods, it was about moving ideas, technologies, and even people. Each transaction was a cultural exchange, a chance for new ideas to seep into the corners of the ancient world like ink spreading across a page. However, this idyllic notion of cultural exchange isn't without its caveats. The Phoenicians weren't just spreading good vibes and artisanal crafts. Their trade routes also facilitated the spread of less savory elements, such as disease and slavery. Yes, the darker side of ancient trade often mirrored the less appealing aspects of modern globalization. The same routes that carried precious goods and new ideas also transported human misery, as the Phoenicians took part in the slave trade, a grim reality that doesn't quite fit the narrative of peaceful merchants. Yet, the appeal of the Phoenician story is undeniable. They were the ultimate survivors, thriving in the chaos of the ancient Mediterranean, a sea notorious for its capricious winds and hidden dangers. It was a world where one wrong turn could lead to a watery grave, yet the Phoenicians navigated it with the confidence of a seasoned Uber driver dodging traffic. Their ability to read the stars, harness the winds, and adapt to ever-changing conditions made them legends of the sea. In the end, the Phoenicians weren't just middlemen. They were the linchpins of an interconnected world. Their trade routes were the arteries through which the ancient Mediterranean thrived, pumping life and prosperity into every port they touched. They showed that commerce could transcend borders, that trade could bring people together, or tear them apart. So, as we chart the course through the Phoenician legacy, let's remember both the glamour and the grime, the myths and the reality. These ancient mariners weren't just merchants. They were the navigators of an era, plotting courses that shaped the world as we know it. And while the seas may have been unforgiving, the Phoenician spirit was as resilient as the cedar ships they sailed, carving a path through history with every wave they conquered. As we sail deeper into the stormy seas of Phoenician history, let's dock at the bustling harbor of politics and society, the true wind beneath their sails. The Phoenicians were akin to expert chess players, strategically moving their pieces across the Mediterranean board while others were busy flipping tables. Just as their ships were built to withstand the capricious sea, their political acumen was crafted to navigate the equally turbulent waters of ancient geopolitics. First, let's address the elephant in the room. The Phoenicians were not a unified empire. Nope, no single Phoenician king holding court here. Instead, they were a loose confederation of city-states, each as independent as a teenager with their first car. Cities like Tyre, Sidon, and Byblos were the leading lights, each with its own ruler and its own agenda. This decentralized system was both their greatest strength and potential Achilles' heel. When it came to decision-making, they were like a family trying to decide on a pizza topping. Lots of opinions, but somehow they made it work. This independence gave the Phoenicians the flexibility of a yoga instructor. They could adapt quickly to changing political landscapes, which was crucial when you're sandwiched between heavyweights like Egypt and the rising Assyrian Empire. The Phoenicians mastered the art of diplomacy, often playing the role of the Mediterranean Switzerland, neutral, prosperous, and incredibly strategic. When the Assyrians came knocking with their army of doom around the 9th century BCE, the Phoenicians didn't reach for their swords. Instead, they offered tributes and trade agreements, turning potential enemies into business partners. After all, why fight when you can trade? And what about their social structure? Picture a society where merchants were the rock stars and sailors the roadies. In Phoenician cities, the merchant class was the backbone, driving innovation and prosperity. This was a society that valued skill and enterprise over noble birth, a refreshing change of pace in a world where lineage often trumped competence. It's as if the Phoenicians were centuries ahead in realizing that who you knew was less important than what you could do. Skills were the currency here, and trade was the bank. Yet, let's not get too misty-eyed over this ancient proto-meritocracy. Social mobility had its limits, and not everyone was living their best life. While the wealthy merchants were counting their coins, the lower classes were toiling away in workshops and fields. And let's not forget the slaves. Yes, The Phoenicians participated in that grim aspect of ancient society too. They may have been the original linked in, but with some profiles you definitely wouldn't want to endorse. Despite these inequalities, the Phoenicians were remarkably cohesive. Their shared culture was a unifying force that transcended city rivalries. They had a common language, a common religion, and most importantly, a common love of trade. This cultural glue held them together in times of crisis, allowing them to present a united front against external threats. Now, let's talk about their neighbors. The Phoenicians were like the popular kid in high school who somehow managed to stay friends with all the cliques. They had to constantly juggle relationships with the Egyptians, the Assyrians, and later, the Babylonians. Each empire had its own demands, and the Phoenicians were masters at giving just enough to keep everyone happy. They were the original political tightrope walkers, balancing tribute payments and trade agreements with the skill of a circus performer. Their interactions with these empires weren't just about survival, they were also opportunities. The Phoenicians were cultural magpies, adopting and adapting innovations from their more powerful neighbors. From the Egyptians, they borrowed art and religious practices, while the Assyrians influenced their architecture with grandiose city walls and towers. It was a two-way street, though. The Phoenicians exported their alphabet to these lands, which would eventually evolve into the Greek and Latin scripts. Talk about a legacy that writes itself. Of course, not all interactions were peaceful. The Phoenicians had their share of conflicts, particularly with the Greeks, who were emerging as serious contenders in the Mediterranean trade game. Yet, even these clashes had a silver lining. Competition spurred innovation, pushing the Phoenicians to refine their ship designs and improve their trade networks. It was like an ancient version of a tech arms race, with each side trying to outdo the other. The Phoenicians' political and social structures were as robust as their cedar ships, allowing them to weather the storms of history. They may not have built towering empires, but their influence was woven into the fabric of the ancient world. Their cities were the beating hearts of Mediterranean commerce, pumping life into the economic and cultural networks that connected distant shores. As we sail toward the conclusion of this journey, remember that the Phoenicians were more than just traders. They were the navigators of a complex geopolitical landscape. Their story is one of survival, adaptation, and innovation. They remind us that sometimes the greatest strength lies not in conquest, but in connection. And while the waves of history may have eventually washed their cities away, the legacy of the Phoenicians continues to ripple through time, shaping the world we know today. So, stay tuned as we continue to explore the impact of these ancient mariners in the final chapter of their saga, a tale that's far from over. But hold onto your amphorae, because the legacy of the Phoenicians is about to take a deep dive into the murky waters of myth and reality. These ancient sailors left behind more than just a trail of purple-dyed tunics and cedar ships. They left an indelible mark on the Mediterranean world and beyond. So, let's pull back the veil and see how their contributions to navigation and literacy continue to ripple through history. First, let's chart the course of their nautical know-how. The Phoenicians were the GPS of the ancient world, long before satellites were a twinkle in humanity's eye. They perfected the art of celestial navigation, using the stars to guide their ships across the open sea. The North Star, Polaris, was their trusty companion, acting as a fixed point in the ever-changing night sky. This allowed them to venture far beyond the sight of land, a feat that would make even the most seasoned sailor today tip their captain's hat. Their ships, those wonders of Morais and Tenon engineering, were designed for both speed and durability, qualities essential for navigating the unpredictable Mediterranean. Think of them as the ancient equivalent of a sports car, with the rugged reliability of a pickup truck. These vessels weren't just for show. They were the backbone of a trade network so vast that it would make modern logistics companies green with envy. But perhaps the most enduring legacy is something far less tangible: the alphabet. The Phoenicians were the Steve Jobs of antiquity, revolutionizing communication with a system that made writing accessible to the masses. Before their innovation, writing was the domain of scribes and priests, with complex scripts that required years of study. Enter the Phoenician alphabet, a tidy set of 22 consonants that could be combined to form any word in the Phoenician language. It was like switching from hieroglyphics to text messages, fast, efficient, and oh so practical. This alphabet spread like wildfire, adopted and adapted by cultures across the Mediterranean. The Greeks took it, added vowels, because who doesn't love a good A-E-I-O-U, and passed it on to the Romans. From there, it morphed into the Latin script, which, as you might have noticed, is still very much in use today. So, the next time you jot down a grocery list, give a nod to the Phoenicians, the unsung heroes who made literacy something you could, quite literally, write home about. Yet, as with any good story, it's not all sunshine and sea breezes. The Phoenician legacy is tangled in a web of myths and misconceptions. For one, there's the romantic notion that they were the peaceful, pioneering traders of the ancient world. While it's true they preferred commerce to conquest, they weren't exactly handing out friendship bracelets at every port. They were shrewd business people, and their trade routes sometimes facilitated less savory elements like slavery and piracy. It's a reminder that progress often comes with a shadow, and the same routes that spread goods and knowledge also carried human misery. Then there's the myth of their disappearance. The narrative often paints the Phoenicians as a lost civilization, swallowed by the sands of time. But the truth is more nuanced. While their cities eventually fell to empires like Assyria and Rome, their influence persisted. Carthage, the jewel of the Phoenician colonies, rose to become a formidable power in its own right, going toe-to-toe with Rome in the Punic Wars. Even after Carthage was razed in 146 BCE, the echoes of Phoenician culture lingered in the Mediterranean, like the faint scent of cedar on a sea breeze. In the end, the Phoenicians were more than the sum of their trade goods. They were the architects of an interconnected world, proving that influence doesn't always require a throne or an army. Their legacy is a testament to the power of innovation and adaptability, qualities that allowed them to thrive in a world as unpredictable as the sea itself. They remind us that history is written not just by the conquerors, but also by those who dared to sail into the unknown. So, as we bid farewell to the Phoenicians, let's raise a glass of their finest vintage and toast to a civilization that navigated the complex currents of ancient geopolitics with skill and savvy. Their story is one of resilience and ingenuity, of myths and realities intertwining like the threads of a tapestry. It's a legacy that's both celebrated and misunderstood, leaving us with more questions than answers and a profound appreciation for the sailors who charted the course of history. Because in the grand voyage of human history, the Phoenicians were the compass that pointed us toward a connected future, proving that sometimes the greatest discoveries are found not in the stars, but in the spaces between them. The 17th century Netherlands was like that one kid in class who went from obscurity to overachiever overnight. While the rest of Europe was busy squabbling over thrones and territories, the Dutch were quietly engineering an economic miracle. Think less Game of Thrones, more Wall Street with a side of windmills. At the heart of this transformation was a unique combination of geography, innovation, and a pinch of good old-fashioned mercantile cunning. Let's start with the basics. Water. The Netherlands is essentially a country that nature never intended to exist. It's flat, marshy, and prone to flooding, basically a waterlogged nightmare. But the Dutch turned this soggy setup into a strategic advantage. Using windmills as their secret weapon, they drained swamps and reclaimed land faster than a real estate developer with a vendetta. By the mid-1600, they had thousands of these wooden giants spinning away, not just to keep their feet dry, but to power sawmills and grind grain. These windmills weren't just quaint scenery, they were the engines of an economic revolution. Speaking of revolutions, let's talk trade, the real MVP of the Dutch Golden Age. The Dutch East India Company, or Verenigd Oostindische Compagnie, VARC, if you're feeling fancy, was the world's first multinational corporation, and more impressively, the first company to issue stock. Founded in 1602, the VOC was a juggernaut of capitalistic ambition, with a fleet of ships that made Amazon's delivery network look like a joke. They weren't just shipping spices and silks, they were exporting an entire economic model. This company became so powerful it could wage war, negotiate treaties, and even mint its own currency. It was like the Amazon, Apple, and Pentagon of its day rolled into one. The VOC's success was not just about gutsy governance and a knack for navigation. It was a testament to Dutch financial wizardry. Amsterdam became the world's financial hub, with the establishment of the Amsterdam Stock Exchange in 1602, basically the Wall Street of the 17th century. Suddenly, anyone with a few guilders and a dream could buy a piece of the action. It was capitalism unchained, and with it came a flurry of speculative ventures and risky investments, which brings us to the infamous tulip mania. Now, before you roll your eyes at the thought of flowers causing financial chaos, remember that in 1636-37, a single tulip bulb could cost you the equivalent of a luxury townhouse in Amsterdam. Yes, you heard that right. At the peak of this botanical bonanza, a particularly rare tulip bulb, like the Semper Augustus, was reportedly sold for 10,000 guilders. For context, a skilled craftsman might earn 300 guilders a year. So, you do the math. People were trading these bulbs like they were gold-plated Fabergé eggs, all for the chance to show off a flower that only bloomed for a week. This wasn't just about tulips. It was about the intoxicating allure of getting rich quick, the same siren song that would later lure people into dot-com bubbles and Bitcoin bonanzas. Tulip mania was the OG economic bubble, and like all bubbles, it ended with a pop. By February 1637, the market crashed spectacularly. Prices plummeted, fortunes were lost, and the tulip went from a symbol of status to a cautionary tale. Imagine the hangover of a nation waking up to realize they'd bet the farm on a flower. But what made the Dutch Golden Age truly golden wasn't just their financial acumen or horticultural hysteria. It was their ability to innovate and adapt. Amsterdam's merchants weren't just savvy, they were visionaries, creating a new world order of trade and finance. They understood the power of global networks long before the internet made it cool. And while the rest of Europe was stuck in their feudal ways, the Dutch were busy building a modern economy on the back of tulip bulbs and spice routes. Of course, this success didn't come without a cost. The wealth of the Golden Age was built on the backs of colonies and exploited labor. The VOC's profits were stained with the blood of countless indigenous peoples and slaves. It's a sobering reminder that behind the romantic tale of windmills and tulips lies a harsher reality. The very systems that made the Netherlands a powerhouse also sowed the seeds of global inequities that still reverberate today. So, as you drift off to sleep, ponder this. The Dutch didn't just build an economy, they engineered a revolution. Their legacy is a testament to human ingenuity and ambition, but also a cautionary tale about the price of progress. From windmills to tulip bulbs, the Dutch Golden Age was a wild ride of highs and lows, a perfect blend of brilliance and folly. And isn't that what history is all about? But let's not get misty-eyed about the Dutch Golden Age just yet. Sure, windmills, tulips, and a financial system that would make Wall Street salivate were all part of the package, but the real secret sauce. It was the Dutch knack for political savvy and social engineering, a combination that turned their tiny nation into a maritime juggernaut. Picture this, a country the size of Maryland outmaneuvering the likes of Spain and England on the high seas. That's not just impressive, it's downright audacious. First, let's talk about those savvy merchants, the real movers and shakers of this era. These were the folks who turned commerce into an art form, orchestrating a global symphony of trade routes and supply chains. They operated from Amsterdam, a city that was to the 17th century what Silicon Valley is to the 21st, an innovation hub buzzing with ideas and ambition. One of the most notable figures was Louis de Geer, a merchant with a knack for weaponry. He was the Elon Musk of his time, except instead of electric cars, he was dealing in cannons and muskets. His genius lay not just in selling arms, but in financing entire wars, thus ensuring a steady demand for his products. Talk about creating your own market. But it wasn't just about individual brilliance, it was about collective strategy. The Dutch Republic was a decentralized political entity, more akin to a modern corporation than a medieval kingdom. Instead of a single ruler, power was spread across a network of provinces and cities, each with its own interests and ambitions. This might sound like a recipe for chaos, but it fostered a culture of negotiation and compromise, which was crucial in navigating the murky waters of international trade and diplomacy. Think of it as a very sophisticated game of cat and mouse, where everyone was both predator and prey. And then there were the naval commanders, the aggressive enforcers of Dutch trade supremacy. Take Martin Tromp and Michiel de Ruyter, for instance. These guys didn't just command ships, they commanded respect. Tromp, with his flamboyant style and penchant for showmanship, was the rock star of the seas. Meanwhile, de Ruyter was the quiet genius, the chess master who outwitted his opponents with strategic finesse. Under their leadership, the Dutch navy became a force to be reckoned with, securing vital trade routes and deterring would-be aggressors. Their exploits read like action-adventure novels, complete with daring battles and high-stakes maneuvers. Yet, for all the tales of derring-do, the Dutch weren't exactly paragons of virtue. Their so-called freedom-loving image starts to tarnish when you scrutinize their colonial exploits. The Vark, hailed as a pioneer of global trade, was also a ruthless colonizer. They didn't just trade spices, they seized territories, imposed monopolies, and exploited local populations. The Banda Islands massacre in 1621 is a particularly grim chapter. When the islanders dared to trade nutmeg with the English, the VOC's Jan Pietersoen Cohen unleashed a brutal crackdown, effectively wiping out the local population to secure Dutch control. It was colonialism at its most brutal, a stark reminder that the quest for profit often came with a horrifying human cost. So, while the Dutch were busy painting pretty pictures of prosperity and progress, the reality was far more complex. Their golden age was as much about exploitation as it was about innovation. The wealth that flowed into Amsterdam's coffers was stained with the blood and sweat of those who toiled in far-off lands. It's a narrative that challenges the romanticized view of the past, forcing us to confront the uncomfortable truths behind the gilded facade. In essence, the Dutch didn't just corner the market on maritime trade. They rewrote the rules of the game. They showed that, with enough cunning and a touch of ruthlessness, even a small nation could play in the big leagues. But like every empire before and after, their rise came with a price. It's a story of ambition and avarice, of triumphs and tragedies, and of the perpetual tension between ideals and actions. As our story sails on, remember this. The Dutch Golden Age was a swirling vortex of contradictions, a testament to both the heights of human achievement and the depths of its folly. It's a tale as old as time, and yet as relevant as ever. Expect more intrigue and insight as we delve deeper into this fascinating era. Stay tuned, because the journey is far from over. The Golden Age wasn't just about ships and savvy deals. It was also about painting the town red, or at least a vibrant palette of Rembrandt ochres and Vermeer blues. You see, while the Dutch were busy conquering the high seas and stock markets, they were also orchestrating a cultural renaissance that would make any art history buff swoon. This era wasn't merely gilded with coins. It was drenched in the rich hues of artistic mastery. Rembrandt van Rijn. His name alone conjures images of shadowy portraits and dramatic lighting. Born in 1606, Rembrandt was the rock star of the art world, minus the smashed guitars and hotel room tantrums. Instead, he wielded a paintbrush with a deftness that turned the mundane into the magnificent. His iconic Night Watch, painted in 1642, wasn't just a group portrait of militiamen. It was a dynamic tapestry of light and shadow, a masterclass in chiaroscuro. And let's not forget his ability to capture the human condition with a single brushstroke. Rembrandt's works weren't just paintings, they were psychological studies wrapped in canvas. Meanwhile, Johannes Vermeer, the meticulous master of light, was busy transforming everyday life into luminous masterpieces. Born in 1632, Vermeer's oeuvre might not be as vast as Rembrandt's, but what it lacks in quantity, it makes up for in quality. Take Girl with a Pearl Earring. For instance, painted around 1665, it's often dubbed the Mona Lisa of the North. With its enigmatic gaze and shimmering earring, it's a perfect blend of mystery and simplicity, capturing a fleeting moment with timeless elegance. Vermeer didn't just paint pictures, he painted moments, frozen in time with the precision of a high-def snapshot. But before you get all misty-eyed with visions of Dutch masters, let's sprinkle a bit of reality into this artistic fairy tale. The truth is, while these artists were creating masterpieces, they weren't exactly swimming in guilders. Rembrandt, despite his fame, found himself neck-deep in debt later in life. In 1656, he declared insolvency, and his belongings, artworks included, were auctioned off to settle his accounts. Vermeer, too, faced financial hardships, dying penniless in 1675, leaving his wife and children in considerable debt. It's a sobering reminder that while their canvases were rich, their pockets often were not. On the surface, the Dutch Golden Age paints a picture of harmony between commerce and culture, but dig a little deeper, and you'll find the city's gritty underbelly. Amsterdam, the heart of this cultural renaissance, was a bustling metropolis teeming with life, but it wasn't all artistic salons and bohemian gatherings. The city streets were a cacophony of languages, smells, and social classes, a melting pot of opportunity and exploitation. The city's picturesque canals, now the Instagram backdrop of choice, were originally the arteries of commerce, crucial for transport and trade. Built in the early 17th century, this intricate network facilitated the movement of goods and people, effectively transforming Amsterdam into one of Europe's busiest ports. But these waterways also had a less glamorous side. They doubled as open sewers, often filled with waste and debris. Romantic gondola rides, not quite, more like navigating a floating landfill, with an aroma to match. The urban landscape was a reflection of the society that inhabited it, both progressive and precarious. Amsterdam was a haven for those seeking religious and intellectual freedom, yet it was also a hotbed of inequality. The same canals that carried the wealth of the world also encapsulated the stark divide between the haves and the have-nots. The opulent homes of the merchant elite stood in stark contrast to the cramped, squalid quarters of the working class. The city was a living paradox, where prosperity and poverty rubbed shoulders on a daily basis. And let's not forget the city's thriving red-light district, a testament to Amsterdam's liberal ethos. Prostitution was not only tolerated but regulated, providing a steady income for many women. It was a gritty reality that coexisted with the city's lofty ideals, a reminder that Amsterdam was as much a city of vice as it was of virtue. In this complex tapestry of wealth and want, art and commerce, Amsterdam was a city that defied simple definitions. It was a place where Rembrandt's masterpieces could share space with merchant ledgers, where Vermeer's serene interiors contrasted with the chaotic energy of the streets. The Dutch Golden Age was a time of contradictions, where the sublime mingled with the sordid, creating a vibrant mosaic that still captivates us today. As we sail through this cultural renaissance, remember, the real beauty of the Golden Age lies not just in its art or its achievements, but in its complexity. It's a story of light and shadow, of highs and lows, much like the paintings that emerged from this era. And as we continue our journey through this fascinating chapter in history, keep your eyes peeled for more tales of triumph and turmoil, because the Dutch Golden Age is far from finished with its surprises. As we sail through this cultural renaissance, remember, the real beauty of the Golden Age lies not just in its art or its achievements, but in its complexity. Speaking of complexity, let's dive into the labyrinthine world of the Dutch financial system, a system so intricate it could make even the most seasoned Wall Street trader break into a sweat. First, let's talk about the Amsterdam Stock Exchange, the granddaddy of all stock markets. Founded in 1602, this was where the magic, or mayhem, depending on your luck, happened. It was the first official stock exchange, a buzzing hive of commerce and speculation, where merchants, investors, and speculators gathered in a frenzy of buying and selling. Picture the trading floor as a chaotic bazaar where fortunes were made and lost with the flick of a quill. This was capitalism in its rawest form, complete with all the thrills and spills. The genius of the Amsterdam Stock Exchange wasn't just in its ability to trade shares. It was in how it democratized financial opportunities. Suddenly, anyone with a few guilders and a dose of daring could own a piece of a trading venture, like the now infamous VOC. This wasn't just about moving money. It was about creating a financial ecosystem that laid the groundwork for modern banking and finance. In fact, the practices and principles established here would later echo down Wall Street's canyons, shaping the global economy in ways that even the most ambitious Dutch merchant couldn't have imagined. Now, let's peel back the layers of the VOC, or the Dutch East India Company, that titan of trade and prototype for multinational corporations. This was the Apple and Amazon of its day, only with less tech and more spice. Founded in 1602, with the express purpose of monopolizing the valuable spice trade, the VOC was a capitalist colossus, and its business practices were as bold as they were brutal. This company didn't just trade goods, It traded power and influence across continents, with a fleet of over 150 ships at its peak. That's like having a personal army of floating warehouses, each one a cog in the vast machinery of capitalism. The numbers alone are staggering. By the mid-17th century, the VOC was paying out dividends of up to 40%, a return that would make even the most optimistic stockholder today swoon. But these impressive figures came with a darker side. The VOC's success was built on the backs of exploited labor and the ruthless suppression of competitors. The company didn't just play hardball, it played with cannonballs, using military might to enforce its monopolies in the East Indies. The Banda Islands massacre of 1621, where the VOC decimated the local population to secure control of the nutmeg trade, is a stark reminder of the lengths to which they would go for profit. Yet, despite its cutthroat practices, the VOC also pioneered innovations that would become staples of modern business. It was the first company to issue bonds and shares of stock to the general public, essentially inventing the concept of a publicly traded company. This innovation democratized investment, allowing anyone with the means to buy into the company and share in its profits. It was a financial revolution that transformed the way business was done, setting a precedent that would eventually lead to the stock markets and corporate structures we know today. But before we get too misty-eyed about the VOC as a beacon of capitalism, let's remember that it was also a cautionary tale of unchecked corporate power. By the time it was dissolved in 1799, the company was drowning in debt and corruption, a victim of its own success. It turns out that even the mightiest corporations are not immune to the pitfalls of greed and mismanagement, a lesson as relevant today as it was then. The impact of the Dutch financial system extended beyond mere commerce. It was also a catalyst for social and political change, reshaping the fabric of Dutch society. The wealth generated by the stock exchange and the VOC didn't just fill the coffers of the merchant elite. It fueled a burgeoning middle class, creating opportunities for social mobility that were rare in the rest of Europe. This newfound prosperity also fostered a culture of intellectual and artistic innovation, as the wealthy invested in education, science, and the arts. Yet this prosperity was not evenly distributed. While Amsterdam's merchant elite lived in opulent canal houses, the working class often toiled in squalid conditions. The city's financial boom was a double-edged sword, bringing both opportunity and inequality. It was a microcosm of the modern world, where the gap between rich and poor could be as wide as the canals themselves. So, as we marvel at the Dutch Golden Age, let's not forget the gritty realities that lurked beneath the surface. The financial innovations of the era were groundbreaking, but they were also grounded in a system of exploitation and inequality that echoes through history. It's a reminder that the pursuit of profit can come at a high price, a lesson that remains as relevant today as it was 4 centuries ago. As we continue our journey through this fascinating era, remember, the Dutch Golden Age was a time of contradictions, a testament to both the heights of human achievement and the depths of its folly. And as we unravel the next chapter in this intriguing tale, stay tuned for more insights and surprises, because the story of the Dutch Golden Age is far from over. So here we are, on the cusp of the Dutch Golden Age's grand finale, a story as intricate as a Rembrandt etching and just as full of shadows. The decline of this era wasn't a dramatic crash, but more of a slow unraveling, like a carefully knitted sweater steadily losing its shape. One thread pulled was the shifting sands of international politics. As the 17th century rolled into the 18th, the Dutch found themselves sandwiched between the swelling ambitions of England and France, two nations that could smell opportunity like a shark smells blood in water. The Anglo-Dutch Wars, 4 in total by the late 1600, were less about who could sail the prettiest ships and more about who would dominate global trade. Despite their earlier naval prowess, the Dutch struggled to keep up with England's naval expansion and industrial might. The Treaty of Westminster in 1674 ended the Third Anglo-Dutch War, but it came at the cost of New Amsterdam, which you might know today as New York City. Imagine trading one of the world's most iconic cities for the British-held Suriname, a place so mosquito-infested it could make a naturopath cringe. But it wasn't just foreign affairs that frayed the fabric of the Golden Age. Domestically, the Dutch economy was experiencing its own brand of turbulence, the kind that could make even the most optimistic speculator reach for a bottle of Geneva. Remember the tulip mania? It was just the beginning of a series of speculative bubbles that would test the resilience of Dutch capitalism. In the late 17th century, the Dutch faced a financial crisis when the French invaded during the Franco-Dutch War. The conflict drained resources and forced the Dutch to adopt heavy taxation, squeezing the life out of their once thriving economy. As if that wasn't enough, the very financial markets that had made Amsterdam the envy of the world began to wobble. The Waag, once a titan of trade, was showing signs of wear and tear. By the 18th century, it was plagued by corruption, inefficiency, and competition from emerging European powers. The company that had once issued dividends like candy on Halloween was now drowning in debt. When it finally dissolved in 1799, it left a legacy as a cautionary tale of corporate greed and mismanagement. So what does all this mean for the legacy of the Dutch Golden Age? Let's not sugarcoat it. It was an era full of contradictions. The same society that fostered groundbreaking art and financial innovation also indulged in colonial exploitation and social inequality. It's a bit like finding out your favorite rock star has a tax evasion problem. The art is still great, but the reality is a tad disappointing. Yet, despite its flaws, the Dutch Golden Age left an indelible mark on global trade and finance. Amsterdam's stock exchange laid the groundwork for modern financial markets, and the VOC's business model was a prototype for today's multinational corporations. The era's emphasis on trade and commerce created a blueprint that still influences global economic practices. If you've ever invested in a stock, or even just used a credit card, you've got a little piece of the Dutch legacy in your wallet. And let's not forget the cultural impact. Rembrandt and Vermeer may not have died rich, but their contributions enriched the world in ways that transcend coin and currency. Their works continue to inspire, reminding us that art can be both a reflection of its time and a timeless commentary on the human condition. In a way, the art of the Dutch Golden Age is its most enduring triumph, a canvas of light and shadow, capturing the paradoxes of an era that dared to dream big. So, as we close this chapter, let's raise a glass to the Dutch Golden Age, not as a flawless utopia, but as a fascinating tapestry of ambition, brilliance, and folly. It was a time of great achievements and even greater contradictions, a reminder that history is never black and white, but an ever-shifting spectrum. And as you drift off to sleep, ponder this. The legacy of the Dutch Golden Age is much like a Vermeer painting, full of light and shadow, mystery and clarity, a work in progress that continues to unfold even today. In the heart of southern Africa, where modern-day Zimbabwe now lies, something extraordinary happened around the 11th century. A kingdom emerged, one that would leave behind some of the most impressive stone ruins on the continent. Great Zimbabwe, the name both of the kingdom and its remarkable city, didn't just spring up overnight. It was the product of an intriguing mix of geography, trade, and human ambition, all wrapped up in the rich tapestry of African history. To really get into the nitty-gritty of Great Zimbabwe, we have to start with its setting. The region is a highland plateau, boasting fertile soils and an abundance of natural resources. Mother Nature played her part well, providing a landscape that was just begging for civilization to flourish. But let's not get too misty-eyed. This wasn't some kind of Eden untouched by the woes of the world. The people here had to contend with the practicalities of life, like unpredictable weather patterns and the occasional hostile neighbor. Now, if you're imagining a land bustling with zebras and lions, you're not completely off the mark. But the real gold mine was, well, gold. Great Zimbabwe sat smack dab in the middle of a gold-rich area. The Shona people, who were the brains and brawn behind this kingdom, knew the value of their golden backyard. They didn't just sit on their hands. They mined it, traded it, and built a thriving economy around it. By the 11th century, they had crafted a powerful state, central to a trade network that stretched from the Swahili coast to the far-flung markets of China and Persia. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Before there was a kingdom, there were just scattered communities. Early settlers in the region, likely ancestors of the Shona, started to form more complex societies around the 4th century. They were the ones who laid the groundwork for what would eventually become Great Zimbabwe. And they weren't just about gold. These early folks were savvy farmers and herders, cultivating sorghum and millet and raising cattle. Their society was built on a mix of agriculture and trade, a classic combo that has launched many a civilization. Fast forward a few centuries, and we see the rise of the Jizo culture, a precursor to the Shona. They were already making a mark in the region, with settlements that showed a clear hierarchy. You could say they were the opening act before the main event of Great Zimbabwe. These Jizo communities were trading with the Indian Ocean coast, exchanging ivory and gold for beads and cloth. They were also starting to build with stone, a skill that would reach its zenith in Great Zimbabwe. Ah, the stone. Ruins of Great Zimbabwe are a testament to the architectural genius of its people. But we're not quite there yet. Let's talk about the myths first, because every great kingdom has its legends. One of the most persistent stories is that Great Zimbabwe was built by outsiders, perhaps Phoenicians or Hebrews. This myth was so popular among European explorers and colonizers that it stuck around for centuries. It's a classic case of surely locals couldn't have done this, as patronizing as it is false. The truth is far more fascinating. The Shona were skilled builders, and they didn't need any help from ancient mariners from across the seas. Around the 11th century, they started constructing stone structures that would become the trademark of Great Zimbabwe. These weren't just any old piles of rocks. We're talking about carefully laid stone walls, some as high as 11 meters. That's about 36 feet for the metrically challenged, constructed without mortar. The great enclosure, the most famous of these structures, is an architectural marvel that still baffles experts today. So why stone? Well, stone is durable, impressive, and sends a clear message. We're here, we're powerful, and we're not going anywhere. It was also a way to display wealth and status. The elites of Great Zimbabwe knew that stone structures would stand the test of time, making a statement that outlasted their own lifetimes. And while the myths might have painted these builders as foreigners, the reality is that the Shona were perfectly capable of such feats. They were master craftsmen, using local granite to create something that would endure long after their kingdom had faded. But let's not get too caught up in the stones and forget about the socio-political climate. The Shona society was organized into a hierarchy, with a king at the top, followed by nobles, commoners, and slaves. The king, or Mambo, wielded considerable power, both in spiritual and earthly matters. This was a society that placed a high value on ancestry and lineage, and the king was seen as a divine figure, a living connection to the spirits of the land. The political structure was supported by a network of chiefs, each overseeing their own territories. This decentralized system allowed Great Zimbabwe to expand its influence far and wide, without the need for constant direct control. It was a clever setup that allowed for flexibility and adaptation, key ingredients for any successful empire. So, there you have it. The stage is set for the rise of Great Zimbabwe, a kingdom born from a perfect storm of geography, resources, and human ingenuity. It's a story of resilience and ambition, of myths debunked and realities embraced. And while the stones may be silent now, they still have plenty of stories to tell. As we continue to explore the rise of this fascinating kingdom, remember, history is never just about what happened. It's about why it mattered and the legacy it left behind. And speaking of stories, the stones of Great Zimbabwe have plenty to tell, and not just about the people who built them, but the sheer ambition it took to stack those rocks sky high. Let's dig into the architectural wonders themselves, because, honestly, these structures are the rock stars of African history. Pun absolutely intended. First up, let's talk construction techniques. Forget your modern cement mixers and fancy cranes. The Shona builders used nothing but gravity and geometry. Picture this. Enormous walls constructed without a speck of mortar, standing tall and proud for centuries. The stones, carefully cut from local granite, were laid in an interlocking pattern that'd make a jigsaw puzzle look like child's play. Each piece was carved and placed with precision. No room for shoddy workmanship here. These builders were the kings of dry stone masonry, a technique as impressive as it is ancient. But before you romanticize these feats as the stuff of legend, let's inject a dose of reality. The labor behind these marvels wasn't some utopian community effort where everyone sang cumbaya while hoisting stones. This was hard, grueling work, and it's likely that a labor force, possibly including slaves, did the heavy lifting. These structures were the result of blood, sweat, and tears, and maybe a few choice words muttered under the breath of exhausted workers. Now, if you think these stones were just plopped down randomly, think again. The Great Enclosure, the piece de resistance of Great Zimbabwe, is a masterclass in design, stretching over 250 meters in circumference and boasting walls up to 11 meters high. It's the largest ancient structure south of the Sahara. Imagine the logistical nightmare of aligning thousands of stones over uneven terrain without toppling the whole thing. These folks had no blueprint, no CAD software, just sheer skill and determination. And what was the economic impact of these structures, you ask? Well, building in stone wasn't just about aesthetics or practicality. It was a power move. A stone city shouted wealth and stability in a way that a mud hut never could. It was the medieval equivalent of driving a top-of-the-line sports car or wearing the latest designer threads. The elites of Great Zimbabwe used these structures to show off their prosperity and solidify their status. No wonder the kingdom became a magnet for traders and travelers eager to cash in on the gold rush. As for the labor force, well, considering the scale and complexity of these projects, it's likely they had quite the operation going. Picture a bustling scene of laborers, artisans, and overseers, each playing a role in this grand architectural symphony. The Shona society was stratified, with a clear hierarchy that helped organize such massive undertakings. The king, or Mambo, likely wielded his power to mobilize resources and manpower. After all, nothing says, "I'm in charge," quite like a colossal stone fortress. Now let's tackle those persistent myths. There's an irresistible allure to imagining ancient mariners or lost tribes swooping in to build these structures. Sure, it makes for a great story, but the reality is far more grounded, and dare I say, inspiring. The Shona didn't need any foreign intervention to create their masterpiece. Their construction methods were homegrown, honed over generations of building with stone. So next time someone tries to sell you on the idea of Phoenician architects in southern Africa, remember, the truth is often stranger and more fascinating than fiction. Now, these stones weren't just sitting pretty. They had a function, a purpose beyond mere aesthetic. The Great Enclosure, in particular, likely served as a royal palace, a ceremonial center, or maybe even a combination of both. It was a place where the elite gathered, where decisions were made, and where power was both demonstrated and exercised. This was no mere decorative feature. It was the beating heart of the kingdom. But let's not ignore the elephant in the room, the debate about what exactly these structures were used for. Some suggest they were granaries, others propose they were religious sites, and a few even theorize they were early forms of urban planning. The truth is, we might never know the full story, and maybe that's part of the charm. These stones keep their secrets close, much like the kingdom they represent. Still, the economic implications were undeniable. Stone buildings signaled stability and attracted traders like moths to a flame. The kingdom became an economic powerhouse, its influence stretching across the continent and beyond. Yet, let's not forget, every empire has its limits. The very factors that led to Great Zimbabwe's rise, trade routes, natural resources, also made it a target for envy and conflict. The kingdom's fortunes were as much about external connections as they were about internal dynamics. In the end, Great Zimbabwe stone structures are a testament to human ingenuity and determination. They tell a story of ambition, of a society that dared to dream big and build even bigger. And while the myths might try to overshadow the reality, the stones stand as a silent rebuke to such fantasies. They remind us that history is not just about the stories we tell, but about the people who lived them, who carved their legacy into the very earth they walked upon. So next time you find yourself in the midst of these ancient walls, remember the hands that placed each stone, the minds that orchestrated their arrangement, and the society that flourished because of them. These structures are more than just piles of rock. They are the echoes of a kingdom that knew its worth and wasn't afraid to show it. As we continue our journey through Great Zimbabwe's history, let's keep our eyes on the stones. They have plenty more to reveal. Now, as the echoes of Great Zimbabwe stone structures linger in our minds, let's shift gears and dive into what really made the kingdom tick, its economic engine. Spoiler alert, it wasn't just about shiny rocks and mooing cows. Sure, gold was the headliner, but the real script involved trade routes, barter systems, and a bustling economy that would make Wall Street blush. Picture this. You're a trader in 14th century Africa, your camel caravan laden with gold, ivory, and maybe a hint of attitude. You've trekked for days, navigating treacherous terrain and sweltering heat, all to reach the promised land of Great Zimbabwe. Why? Because this kingdom was the Amazon prime of its time, a hub of commerce where goods flowed like water in the Nile. Gold was the marquee product, but let's not reduce Great Zimbabwe to a one-trick pony. The kingdom's economy was a smorgasbord of commodities. Cattle herding was as integral as gold mining, providing both sustenance and status. Think of cattle as the medieval equivalent of a Swiss bank account, portable, valuable, and always a good conversation starter. Now, let's talk trade routes, the real veins pumping life into this economic heart. These weren't your garden variety paths. We're talking highways of commerce connecting the Swahili coast to far-flung empires like China and Persia. Kilwa-Kisiwani, a major port city, was a crucial link in this chain. Traders would swap gold and ivory for exotic goods like Chinese porcelain and Persian textiles. No need for a passport, just a keen sense of opportunity and maybe a bit of luck. But hold on, before you get swept away in tales of riches and exotic wares, let's inject a little reality check. These trade routes weren't all silk and spice. They were fraught with danger, from bandits and wild animals to the merciless sun. And while the notion of ancient globalization sounds romantic, it was a gritty, get-your-hands-dirty kind of affair. Traders were the ultimate hustlers, navigating not just physical landscapes, but also the complex web of politics and alliances. Now, about that barter system. Forget your coins and credit cards. Great Zimbabwe's economy thrived on the good old-fashioned art of negotiation. Gold was traded for beads, cattle for cloth, and sometimes even people for power. It was a high-stakes game of give and take, where the value of goods wasn't just determined by their market worth, but by their social and cultural significance. And speaking of people, let's not gloss over the labor force that kept this economic machine running. Mining gold and herding cattle wasn't just for the faint-hearted. It required a significant workforce, likely composed of commoners and slaves. The kingdom's hierarchy ensured that everyone knew their place, with the elite reaping the rewards, while the lower tiers did the heavy lifting. Talk about trickle-down economics in its rawest form. But before you start imagining hidden treasure troves and vaults overflowing with gold, let's dispel a few myths. The idea of untold wealth stashed away in secret chambers is as alluring as it is unlikely. The truth is, gold was a commodity, a means to an end rather than an end in itself. It was circulated, traded, and transformed, playing a crucial role in the kingdom's external relations and internal stability. So why does Great Zimbabwe's economic story matter? Because it was a testament to the kingdom's ability to adapt and thrive in a complex, interconnected world. It wasn't just about accumulating wealth. It was about using that wealth to foster relationships, build alliances, and maintain a balance of power. The kingdom's economic prowess was as much about survival as it was about success, and therein lies the real legacy of Great Zimbabwe. It's not just the stones or the gold, but the intricate dance of economy, society, and politics that propelled this kingdom onto the stage of history. As we continue to unravel the story of this fascinating civilization, remember, it's not just about what they built, but how they built a world that was far larger than the sum of its parts. So next time you're trying to wrap your head around the complexities of modern trade and economics, spare a thought for the traders and herders of Great Zimbabwe. They may not have had spreadsheets or stock markets, but they understood the fundamental truth of commerce. It's not just about what you have, but what you can make of it. And if that's not a lesson worth remembering, I don't know what is. As we leave the bustling markets and winding trade routes behind, there's more to uncover about Great Zimbabwe's role in the global economy. But that's a tale for another time. For now, let's take a moment to appreciate the ingenuity and ambition that turned a kingdom into a legend, one trade deal at a time. Now, as we transition from the bustling markets and intricate trade routes, let's dive headfirst into the intricate web of politics and society that kept the wheels of Great Zimbabwe turning. If you thought the kingdom's architecture and economy were impressive, wait till you hear about the political chess game that was playing out behind the scenes. Imagine the political structure of Great Zimbabwe as a grand soap opera, complete with power struggles, divine kings, and a supporting cast of chiefs and advisors. At the top of this hierarchy sat the Mambo, or king, who wasn't just your run-of-the-mill ruler. Oh no, this guy was practically a rock star. He was seen as a divine figure, the intermediary between the spiritual and earthly realms, a position that required both charisma and cunning. But let's not romanticize the Mambo's role too much. Sure, he had power, but it wasn't absolute. In the grand tradition of power dynamics everywhere, the king's authority was as much about perception as it was about actual control. He relied heavily on a network of chiefs who managed their own territories, ensuring that the kingdom's influence spread far and wide. Think of it as a decentralized system, like a medieval version of federalism, minus the constitutional conventions. These chiefs, or headmen, were the king's eyes and ears. They collected tribute, managed local disputes, and kept the peace. But don't be fooled into thinking they were just the king's lackeys. They had their own ambitions and interests, often acting as power brokers in their own right. And while the king was the figurehead, the realpolitik of Great Zimbabwe meant that he had to keep these chiefs happy or face the consequences. Now, let's talk about the narrative of absolute power. It's a popular trope in history, the idea of a mighty ruler wielding unchecked authority. But in the case of Great Zimbabwe, the reality was more nuanced. The king's power was as much about maintaining delicate alliances as it was about issuing decrees. His rule depended on the loyalty and cooperation of his chiefs, who could just as easily turn against him if they felt their interests were threatened. Sound familiar? It's a tale as old as time, one that echoes through the corridors of power even today. And speaking of loyalty, let's not forget the role of spirituality in cementing the king's authority. The Shona people placed a high value on ancestry and lineage, and the Mambo was seen as a direct descendant of the spirits who governed the land. This connection to the divine gave the king a certain mystique, a spiritual legitimacy that bolstered his earthly power. It was a clever way of ensuring that questioning the king's authority was akin to questioning the will of the ancestors, a risky move in any society. But before you get swept away by the drama of kings and chiefs, let's pause to appreciate the role of community organization. The people of Great Zimbabwe weren't just passive subjects. They played an active role in shaping their society. From laborers and artisans to traders and farmers, each person had a part to play in the kingdom's success. It was a society built on cooperation and mutual benefit, where the whole was definitely greater than the sum of its parts. And here's where things get really interesting. The concept of power in Great Zimbabwe wasn't just about who sat on the throne. It was about the intricate dance of alliances and relationships, the balancing act of interests and ambitions. It's a story of political maneuvering that would make even the most seasoned diplomat break out in a cold sweat. But let's not ignore the elephant in the room, the myth of the benevolent king. History loves to paint rulers as either tyrants or saints, but the truth is often somewhere in between. The Mambo was a ruler, yes, but he was also a man of his time, navigating the complex realities of power and politics. He had to be strategic, balancing the needs of his people with the demands of his chiefs, all while maintaining his own position at the top. And while we're debunking myths, let's tackle the romantic notion of a harmonious society where everyone lived in perfect unity. The reality was far more complex. Great Zimbabwe was a hierarchical society, with clear distinctions between the elite and the commoners. Social mobility was limited, and the lines of division were as rigid as the stone walls that defined the city. It was a society where power and privilege were concentrated at the top, a reflection of the broader dynamics at play. So why does all this matter? Because the story of Great Zimbabwe is not just about stones and gold. It's about the people who lived and breathed within its walls. It's about the power struggles and alliances that shaped their world, the social dynamics that defined their lives. It's a story of human ambition and ingenuity, of a society that dared to dream big and build even bigger. And as we continue to unravel the tale of this fascinating kingdom, remember, history is never just about what happened. It's about why it mattered and the legacy it left behind. The political and social dynamics of Great Zimbabwe offer a window into the complexities of power and society, a reminder that the past is never as simple as it seems. So, as we leave the political intrigue, and social hierarchies behind, there's more to explore about the kingdom's internal dynamics. But that's a story for another time. For now, let's take a moment to appreciate the intricate web of relationships and power plays that kept great Zimbabwe thriving. It's a testament to the resilience and adaptability of a society that knew its worth and wasn't afraid to claim it. As we prepare to delve deeper into the story of great Zimbabwe, let's keep our eyes on the people who made it all possible, the rulers and the ruled, the powerful and the powerless. They may be long gone, but their legacy lives on in the stones and stories they left behind. And if that's not a tale worth telling, I don't know what is. So, as we prepare to delve deeper into the story of great Zimbabwe, let's keep our eyes on the people who made it all possible, the rulers and the ruled, the powerful and the powerless. They may be long gone, but their legacy lives on in the stones and stories they left behind. And if that's not a tale worth telling, I don't know what is. But here's the twist in our historical drama. Every rise comes with its own set of challenges, and great Zimbabwe was no exception. Fast forward to the 15th century, and this once thriving kingdom was showing signs of wear and tear. You know, like a rock star who's been on tour a little too long. So, what went wrong? Why did this powerhouse start to crumble? Well, let's dig in. First on the list of suspects, we have overpopulation. By the peak of its glory, great Zimbabwe was buzzing with life. Estimates suggest the population might have hit around 18,000. Now, that doesn't sound like much compared to today's megacities, but for a medieval African kingdom, that's like having a sold-out stadium concert every day. This population boom brought with it the usual suspects: increased demand for resources, pressure on agriculture, and of course, a whole lot of garbage. It's the age-old story of too many people and not enough room to swing a cat. Then there's resource depletion. The kingdom's success was largely built on its natural bounty: gold, cattle, fertile lands. But as they say, nothing lasts forever. Gold veins were drying up, grazing lands were overused, and soil fertility was on a downward spiral. It's like running out of your favorite coffee pods during a Monday morning rush. Not a good look for a kingdom that relied heavily on these resources to fuel its economy and feed its people. Now, let's throw another curveball into the mix: climate change. No, not the kind with polar bears and melting ice caps, but a medieval version of climate shenanigans. Around the 15th century, the region experienced significant shifts in rainfall patterns. Droughts became more frequent, making agriculture a game of Russian roulette. For a society that depended on farming and livestock, this was a blow that hit harder than a bad review on opening night. But wait, there's more. The factors of decline weren't just environmental or economic. There were social and political frictions as well. The kingdom's decentralized system, once its strength, began to show cracks. Chiefs and local leaders, perhaps sensing the weakening grip of the central authority, started flexing their muscles a little too much. This internal power struggle wasn't exactly conducive to a stable, united front. It was more of a Game of Thrones kind of scenario, minus the dragons, but with all the drama. By the late 15th century, the powerful kingdom of Mutapa had emerged to the north, drawing away trade and influence. The allure of new opportunities elsewhere must have felt like the medieval equivalent of a startup offering better perks and a cooler office space. Traders and artisans packed their bags, leaving the once bustling hub of great Zimbabwe in search of greener pastures. So, with all these factors playing a part, great Zimbabwe gradually declined. By the time Portuguese traders arrived on the scene in the early 16th century, they found the great city mostly deserted, its stone structures silent witnesses to a bygone era. The kingdom that had once been a beacon of trade and culture was now a relic, its glory days preserved only in the tales of those who remembered. Now, if you're thinking this is just another sad tale of rise and fall, think again. The legacy of great Zimbabwe is far more than the sum of its ruins. The stones, though silent, speak volumes about human ingenuity, resilience, and the complexities of building a civilization in an ever-changing world. They tell us about a society that knew how to harness its resources, navigate the intricacies of trade, and wield power in a way that left an indelible mark on history. And what about those myths? The idea that outsiders must have built such a sophisticated society is not just a footnote in history. It's a reminder of the biases that have often clouded our understanding of Africa's past. The truth is, Great Zimbabwe was a homegrown marvel, a testament to the talents and ambitions of the Shona people. It's a story that challenges the narratives spun by early explorers and invites us to look beyond the myth to appreciate the real achievements of this remarkable civilization. As we wrap up this journey through the rise and fall of Great Zimbabwe, let's take a moment to reflect on the lessons it offers. In today's world, where climate change, resource management, and population pressures are as relevant as ever, the story of Great Zimbabwe serves as both a cautionary tale and a source of inspiration. It reminds us that civilizations rise and fall not just because of their leaders or their wealth, but because of how they adapt to change, how they balance the needs of their people with the demands of their environment. So, next time you find yourself pondering the complexities of modern society, spare a thought for the people of Great Zimbabwe. They may have lived centuries ago, but their challenges and triumphs continue to resonate today. And if there's one thing we can learn from their story, it's that history is not just about what happened. It's about what it teaches us about ourselves, our world, and the legacies we leave behind. And there you have it, the tale of Great Zimbabwe, an epic saga of ambition, ingenuity, and resilience, set against the backdrop of a changing world. Whether you're inspired by its achievements or cautioned by its decline, one thing is certain. The stones of Great Zimbabwe have stories to tell, and they're worth listening to. In a world without TV binge-watching or social media doom-scrolling, the ancient Egyptians were busy crafting one of history's most intriguing civilizations along the banks of the mighty Nile. Imagine a place where the landscape was as alive as the people, with the Nile River acting like the civilization's personal Amazon prime, delivering not just goods, but ideas, culture, and, believe it or not, medical know-how. Let's dive into ancient Egyptian medicine, where doctors, without the luxury of microscopes or Wi-Fi, practiced medicine that was surprisingly advanced for its time. Forget the idea of primitive healers waving chicken bones around. These folks were more like the classical rock stars of the medical world. They had manuals, they had methods, and yes, they had some remedies that might make you question their sanity. Take the Ebers Papyrus, for instance. Think of it as the WebMD of ancient Egypt, minus the anxiety. This scroll is a hefty 110 pages of medical wisdom, dating back to about 1550 BCE. It's the closest thing they had to a comprehensive medical textbook. And while it didn't come with a free tote bag, it did offer over 700 magical formulas and remedies. The papyrus covered everything from dental issues to digestive problems, with a few spells thrown in for good measure. Because why not? Now, you might think, how did they manage all this without microscopes, stethoscopes, or even aspirin? Well, the Nile wasn't just any river, it was a lifeline. It fertilized the land, making it a perfect place for plants that doubled as medicinal herbs. The Egyptians were all about plants like acacia and aloe, which they used for everything from soothing burns to, warding off evil spirits. Their pharmacy was as much about spiritual health as physical, which makes sense when you're living in a world where gods might suddenly decide they don't like you anymore. But let's get to the good stuff, the remedies that might make you raise an eyebrow. Crocodile dung, for instance, was a hot commodity. Yes, you heard that right. They used it in a variety of concoctions, sometimes as a contraceptive. Picture this. A woman walks into the pharmacy and asks for the special remedy, and the local apothecary hands her a mixture involving crocodile dung. They believed it had magical properties, which, frankly, is the kind of faith you need when you're smearing reptile excrement on your body. Then there was beer. Not just for Friday nights out, but a staple in their medicinal arsenal. Egyptians were serious about their beer. It was safer to drink than the water sometimes. They used it as an ingredient in several medical remedies, partly because it was nutritious and partly because it was as close to antibiotics as they got. Imagine going to the doctor and being prescribed a six-pack. "Take two and call me in the morning" must have been quite the catchy phrase back then. Despite the oddities, the ancient Egyptians had a surprising grasp on medical practices. Their understanding of the human body was more intuitive than scientific, but they knew enough to perform surgeries and set broken bones. They even dabbled in dentistry, which must have been a real adventure without the luxury of anesthetics. And yet, there they were, extracting teeth and treating cavities with a mixture of pain tolerance and a little bit of prayer. The romantic image of the wise, all-knowing Egyptian healer is just that, a romantic image. The reality was a bit less glamorous. Medicine was as much about trial and error as it was about divine intervention. And while they didn't always hit the mark, their attempts laid the groundwork for future civilizations. So, as we raise a metaphorical glass of ancient beer to these early medical pioneers, let's appreciate their blend of science, magic, and a touch of madness. The next time you're tempted to complain about modern medicine, just remember, at least you don't have to deal with crocodile dung prescriptions. Yet, as we marvel at the audacity of these ancient prescriptions, let's shift our gaze to the figures who were at the center of this medicinal universe, the Egyptian doctors, or as they were more loftily known, the priests of Imhotep. Now, these guys weren't your garden variety medics. Oh no, they were like the rock stars of their day, straddling the line between healthcare professionals and spiritual guides, with a dash of celebrity mystique thrown in for good measure. A time when being a doctor was less about white coats and more about white linen robes, these physician priests were trained in the dual arts of science and magic. Think of it as a Hogwarts meets medical school type of education. Their training ground was the Per Ankh, literally the house of life, which was as much a temple of learning as it was a hospital. These institutions were the intellectual powerhouses of ancient Egypt, where priests became adept in the art of healing, while also mastering hieroglyphs and the memorization of religious texts. You had to be pretty sharp to keep track of all those guards and ailments. Now, you might wonder, how did one earn the title of a physician priest? Well, it wasn't as simple as acing your finals or getting a degree. First, you needed a solid grasp of medical papyri, those ancient scrolls packed with remedies and spells. But beyond that, you needed to be in tune with the gods. After all, healing wasn't just about bandaging wounds. It was about restoring spiritual harmony. Medicine and religion were as intertwined as a cat and a sunbeam in ancient Egypt. One of the key figures in this medical religious mashup was Imhotep himself, a polymath whose resume included architect, vizier, and physician. Imhotep was so revered that he was actually deified, becoming the god for those looking to cure diseases or stave off death. In fact, his temple at Saqqara became a pilgrimage site for those seeking miraculous cures. Picture this, a line of hopeful patients, clutching votive offerings, all waiting for a divine prescription. These doctors were known for their practical treatments, which sometimes bordered on the bizarre, but they were also spiritual healers. They believed deeply in the power of incantations and rituals. If you had a headache, sure, they might prescribe a concoction of herbs, but they'd also throw in a few words to appease the gods. After all, why risk offending a deity when a simple spell might do the trick? And speaking of tricks, let's talk sneezes. Yes, sneezing was a serious affair in ancient Egypt. To us, it might just be an involuntary expulsion of air, but to the Egyptians, it was a moment when your soul could make a quick exit. A sneeze was like an open door to the spirit world, and you wouldn't want any mischievous spirits to sneak in while you were vulnerable. So, a sneeze required immediate attention and possibly a quick prayer to close that spiritual door faster than you can say, Gesundheit. The economic context of this ancient medical system was fascinating. Being a doctor in Egypt wasn't just a calling. It was a lucrative profession, with physicians often on the payroll of the pharaoh himself. For instance, the famous physician Hatshepsut, known as the Lady Overseer of the Lady Physicians, around 2400 BCE, was not only a trailblazer for women in medicine, but also a member of the elite class. It was a position that came with prestige, influence, and more than a few perks. Access to the royal family meant that a physician-priest could wield considerable power, and in a society where health was wealth, they were the gatekeepers. Despite their high status, these healers weren't above using a little trial and error in their practices. They approached medicine as an evolving science, well, as much as you can when you're mixing spells with salves. This blend of faith and fact, magic and medicine, was the hallmark of Egyptian healing arts. And while some treatments seem laughable now, at the time they were cutting edge. In a way, these ancient doctors were the ultimate multitaskers, part shaman, part surgeon, part scientist. They lived in a world where the lines between reality and the mystical were as fluid as the Nile itself. They embraced the unknown with a confidence that would make even the most daring modern-day doctors pause. As we continue to unravel the tapestry of ancient Egyptian medicine, Remember that these were people not so different from us. They too sought cures and comfort in a world that was often unpredictable and harsh. And while we may not prescribe beer or crocodile dung today, we can appreciate the ingenuity and resilience of those early healers. They're a testament to humanity's enduring quest to understand and heal the human body, one sneeze at a time. And speaking of this grand quest to heal and understand, let's dive into the Egyptian pharmacopoeia, a veritable cornucopia of cures that ranged from the surprisingly effective to the downright peculiar. Picture a pharmacy where the shelves are stocked with everything from garden variety herbs to minerals and animal byproducts that would make even the most seasoned apothecary arch an eyebrow. First on the list, we have the herbal heroes. Egyptians were big fans of garlic and onions, not just because they kept the mummies company, but because they genuinely believed these pungent bulbs could ward off illness. And they weren't entirely wrong. Modern science tells us that garlic has antimicrobial properties, so score one for ancient wisdom. They also loved honey, not just to sweeten the pot, but as a natural antibiotic. Honey was slathered on wounds to prevent infection, a practice that's still buzzing in the medical community today. Next up, minerals. The Egyptians had a fondness for natron, a naturally occurring mixture of sodium carbonate and bicarbonate. This wasn't just a handy cleaning agent. It was also used in medicinal concoctions to treat cuts and wounds. Think of natron as the duct tape of the ancient world. Versatile, reliable, and slightly miraculous. Then there's malachite, a green mineral that made its way from the mines of Sinai to the medicine chests of Egyptian physicians. They grind it into a powder and use it as an eye salve, perhaps not realizing that copper, its primary component, does have antiseptic qualities. But here's where things get a little more colorful. Enter the animal kingdom, where the Egyptians weren't shy about experimenting with ingredients that would send Peta into a frenzy today. Lizard blood, mouse droppings, and yes, crocodile dung all found their way into various remedies. Before you gag, consider this. In a world where magic and medicine were intertwined, the mystical allure of these ingredients was powerful. They believed these substances carried protective and restorative powers. And in a society where superstition and science danced hand in hand, who are we to judge? Now, how did all these exotic ingredients make their way to the Nile's edge? Through a complex web of trade routes that crisscrossed the ancient world. The Egyptians traded with their neighbors to the east and south, exchanging grain and gold for incense, spices, and other exotic goods that their land couldn't produce. The incense trade alone was a big business, with frankincense and myrrh pouring into Egypt from the Arabian Peninsula. These fragrant resins were prized for their use in religious rituals, but also found their way into medicinal recipes, believed to purify both body and soul. Economics played a critical role in the availability of these substances. The wealthier you were, the more access you had to these exotic ingredients. If you were a high-ranking official or a member of the royal family, your ailments could be treated with the finest imports money could buy. For the common folk, however, remedies were more likely to involve local herbs and a hefty dose of prayer. It was a stark reminder that medicine, like many things, was a luxury for the privileged. Despite the socio-economic disparities, some Egyptian remedies have stood the test of time. Take willow bark, for instance, which they used to relieve pain. Sound familiar? That's because willow bark contains salicin, a natural precursor to aspirin. But for every effective treatment, there were those best left in the tombs of history. Take the cure for baldness that involved rubbing a mixture of fats from various animals, including lion and hippopotamus, onto the scalp. While it might have made for a glossy head, it likely didn't do much for hair regrowth. It's fascinating how some of these ancient concoctions still resonate today, while others remind us of humanity's propensity for trial and error. The Egyptian pharmacopoeia was a testament to their ingenuity and their willingness to explore the boundaries of the known world, both geographically and scientifically. They were a civilization on the cutting edge, blending the mystical with the medicinal, and their legacy is woven into the very fabric of modern medicine. As we continue our journey through the annals of ancient Egyptian medicine, let's not forget that behind the colorful potions and exotic trades were real people, grappling with the same fears and hopes that we do today. They sought healing and comfort, understanding and control in a world that often offered little of either. And while we may laugh at some of their more outlandish remedies, we can also admire their relentless pursuit of healing, a pursuit that, in many ways, defines the human experience. The Egyptians were nothing if not resourceful, and their pharmacopoeia was as diverse as the land itself. From the sands of the desert to the lush banks of the Nile, they harnessed the natural world in ways that were both innovative and occasionally bewildering. They were pioneers, willing to experiment with what nature provided, even if it meant rubbing crocodile dung on your skin or grinding up valuable minerals for a salve. It's a reminder that the quest for health and longevity is as old as civilization itself. And while we might not always agree with their methods, we can certainly respect their dedication. So, as we ponder the legacy of these early pharmacists, let's tip our hats to their audacity and creativity. They laid the groundwork for centuries of medical advancement, proving that even in the realm of healing, there's room for a little magic and a lot of imagination. And while the crocodile dung might be off the table today, the spirit of exploration and the drive to heal are timeless. Speaking of audacity and creativity, let's pivot to another fascinating aspect of Egyptian medicine that's often overshadowed by the allure of gold-encrusted sarcophagi and tales of cursed mummies. Yes, I'm talking about surgery and dentistry, two fields where the Egyptians showed both brilliance and, let's say, a bit of overconfidence. First, let's clear the air about Egyptian surgery. Contrary to popular belief, these ancient healers didn't just twiddle their thumbs waiting for the next embalming session. They were wielding knives, and not just the kind used for slicing open a croissant. We're talking about scalpels, forceps, and probes, all crafted from bronze or copper. The Edwin Smith papyrus, dating back to around 1600 BCE, reads like an ancient trauma manual. It lists everything from head wounds to dislocated vertebrae with a level of detail that would make any modern-day ER doctor nod in appreciation. This text, named after the American who discovered it, is a rare gem that shows Egyptians weren't just amateur bone setters. They were pioneering surgeons in their own right. Now, let's address the big myth, the notion that Egyptians were merely mystical mummy makers. Sure, they loved a good mummification process. Who wouldn't? With all those natron baths and ritualistic wrappings. It was the original spa treatment, minus the relaxation. But their surgical skill set was more than skin deep. They performed surgeries to treat abscesses, amputate limbs, and even sew up wounds. The papyrus mentions treating head injuries with binding fresh meat to the wound, which, while not exactly vegan-friendly, was a rudimentary attempt at wound healing. And while some procedures might sound like the stuff of nightmares, imagine a dental extraction without anesthesia. These were genuine attempts at medical intervention, not mere ritualistic mumbo-jumbo. Speaking of dentistry, the Egyptian approach was a mix of practicality and, well, let's call it adventurousness. Dental problems were rampant, thanks to a diet that included plenty of coarse bread and grit from stone-ground flour. While they didn't have a high-tech dental clinic to pop into, they did have a few tricks up their linen sleeves. Remedies for toothaches often involved a concoction of herbs and spices, sometimes mixed with honey to create a paste. The Ebers papyrus even suggests using a mixture of ground ochre and water for mouthwash. Sure, it's no minty fresh rinse, but it's a start. What's truly fascinating is that they attempted dental surgeries. Yes, you heard that right. Ancient Egyptians were performing rudimentary dental operations. Evidence of dental prosthetics has been found, where missing teeth were replaced with donor teeth, held in place with gold wire. Talk about a shiny smile. However, there's no denying that the procedures were painful and risky. After all, Narvacaine was a few millennia away. So, while they might have lacked in modern dental hygiene, their attempts show a commendable commitment to oral health, even if it involved a fair bit of trial and error. Now, let's not forget the economic and political backdrop that shaped these medical practices. Medicine in ancient Egypt wasn't just a public service. It was a career path that could lead to both power and prestige. While your average farmer might not have had access to the latest remedies, the elite had their pick of treatments, often served with a side of incantations to placate the gods. The Pharaoh's physicians were akin to rock stars, wielding influence in a land where health was directly tied to wealth and status. But as we debunk the Hollywood-driven myths of mystical healers and all-knowing priests, it's crucial to remember why these myths persist. There's an undeniable allure to the idea of ancient wisdom wrapped in mystery and magic. The truth, however, is far more nuanced. Egyptian doctors were practical scientists, albeit with an occasional penchant for the bizarre. They navigated the murky waters of medicine with a blend of observation, experimentation, and a healthy dose of spiritual guidance. In sum, the Egyptians weren't just mummy makers with a penchant for dramatic flair. They were pioneering medical practitioners who laid the groundwork for future generations. Their blend of science, superstition, and sometimes unorthodox methods reflects a civilization striving to understand the human body in a world where the natural and supernatural were inextricably linked. As we continue our journey, let's keep unraveling the layers of this ancient medical mystery, one surgical suture and one herbal remedy at a time. While the Egyptians were busy perfecting the art of surgery and dentistry, let's not forget the grand legacy they left behind, a legacy that reached far beyond the sandy banks of the Nile. These ancient healers, with their blend of science and sorcery, were the unsung architects of medical knowledge that would echo through the corridors of time. And if you think their only contribution was wrapping mummies, you might want to sit down for this. The Egyptians' medical prowess wasn't lost on the Greeks, who were known for picking up good ideas like a magpie hoarding shiny objects. When Alexander the Great swept through Egypt in 332 BCE, he didn't just leave with souvenirs. He took with him a wealth of medical knowledge, effectively laying the groundwork for the Hellenistic period's medical advancements. The great Greek physician Hippocrates, often heralded as the father of medicine, might have owed a nod of thanks to those Egyptian scrolls. It's hard to imagine Hippocrates not flipping through pages of the Ebers papyrus like it was the latest bestseller, taking notes on everything from herbal remedies to surgical techniques. And it wasn't just the Greeks who were taking notes. The Romans, ever the pragmatists, adopted and adapted Egyptian medical practices with their usual flair for organization and empire building. Roman medicine, while heavily influenced by Greek knowledge, also bore the mark of Egyptian techniques, particularly in surgery and pharmacology. Roman military doctors, for instance, could be found stitching up soldiers with techniques that would have been familiar to an Egyptian healer. So, while Roman legions were busy conquering lands, their medical corps were quietly conquering disease, thanks in part to those Nile-side pioneers. Fast forward a few centuries, and you'll find Islamic scholars in the Middle Ages preserving and expanding upon Egyptian medical knowledge. The House of Wisdom in Baghdad, a pinnacle of medieval scholarship, was home to many a physician who pored over translations of ancient Egyptian texts. These scholars, like the renowned Avicenna, compiled medical encyclopedias that would become standard references in both the Muslim world and medieval Europe. So, when you think of the European Renaissance, with its explosion of knowledge and science, remember that much of it was built on the shoulders of giants who lived by the Nile. But what about today, in our modern world of MRI machines and robotic surgeons? You might be surprised to learn that some ancient Egyptian ideas are still kicking around. Take the concept of holistic medicine, for instance. The Egyptians saw health as a balance of mind, body, and spirit, a notion that's making a comeback in contemporary healthcare. And while we might not be prescribing beer as a cure-all, though some might argue its merits, the use of honey as an antibacterial agent is still very much in vogue. It's as if the Egyptians were peering into the future, nodding sagely as they stirred their herbal concoctions. Now, let's have a little fun with this. Imagine an ancient Egyptian healer transported to a modern hospital. Picture them gawking at an X-ray machine or raising an eyebrow at a bottle of hand sanitizer. They'd probably chuckle at the sight of a doctor in scrubs, thinking back to their own linen robes and beaded necklaces. But here's the kicker. They might find some things more familiar than you'd expect. The concept of cleanliness, the importance of diet, even the use of natural remedies, all things they practiced millennia ago. It seems the more things change, the more they stay the same. But let's not get misty-eyed just yet. For all their genius, ancient Egyptian medicine was a world away from the evidence-based practices we rely on today. Their treatments were as much about appeasing deities as they were about science. And while they laid crucial foundations, they also left behind a trail of snake oil and superstition that took centuries to unravel. It's a testament to human nature, really. our eternal quest to make sense of the world, even if it means rubbing crocodile dung on your skin. As we wrap up this journey through the sands of time, let's tip our hats to those ancient healers. They dared to poke and prod at the mysteries of the human body, armed with nothing more than intuition and a dash of divine intervention. Their legacy is etched not just in the annals of history, but in every aspirin tablet and antiseptic wipe we use today. So next time you pop a pill or visit the doctor, spare a thought for the Egyptian healer who might have whispered the first inklings of medical wisdom into the ear of a curious Greek or a pragmatic Roman. In a world where we can sequence genomes and 3D print organs, it's easy to forget the humble beginnings of medicine. But perhaps there's value in remembering that the road to modern healthcare began with a group of determined individuals scribbling on papyrus, mixing potions, and praying to gods. In doing so, we're reminded that the journey of medicine is a vast tapestry woven from countless threads of curiosity and courage. And maybe, just maybe, we still have a thing or two to learn from those ancient healers who dared to dream of a healthier world, one spell and one salve at a time. In the shadowy corridors of 18th century Prussia, where the air was thick with the scent of leather boots and a hint of gunpowder, a young Frederick was grappling with the kind of parenting that would make even the strictest tiger mom look like a teddy bear. Enter Frederick William I, the Soldier King, a man whose passion for military discipline was matched only by his love for collecting exceptionally tall soldiers. Yes, you heard that right. Frederick's dad was obsessed with turning his army into a parade of giants, but more on that bizarre hobby later. Frederick was born in 1712, and from the moment he could toddle, he was thrust into a world of regimented drills and relentless expectations. His father, Frederick William I, wasn't exactly the type to hand out participation trophies. He believed in the transformative power of tough love if, by tough love, you mean dragging your son out of bed at the crack of dawn for military drills, regardless of any royal prerogative to sleep in. Now, our young Frederick, or Fritz, as he was known, was a bit of an odd duck in this boot camp of a household, while his father was busy amassing a collection of towering soldiers, reportedly for a regiment known as the Potsdam Giants. Fritz was sneaking off with books of poetry tucked under his arm, perhaps dreaming of a world where words could wield more power than swords. This literary inclination was about as welcome in the Prussian court as a snowstorm in July. One infamous incident that really set the stage for Frederick's tumultuous relationship with his father involved a particular friend, Hans Hermann von Katt. Fritz and Katt bonded over music and poetry, much to the Soldier King's dismay. The king's idea of a bad influence wasn't a friend who smoked behind the stables, but one who dared to encourage his son's artistic side. In 1730, Frederick, fed up with his father's militaristic tyranny, decided on a daring escape plan with Katt. They make a break for it, head to England, and live a life unfettered by Prussian steel. Of course, this was the 18th century, not a Shakespearean comedy. The plan was foiled, and the consequences were dire. Frederick was dragged back to face his father's wrath, while Katt, caught and tried, faced execution right before Frederick's eyes, a grim reminder that teenage rebellion in a royal household could be a deadly affair. Back to the Soldier King's obsession with tall soldiers, this wasn't just a quirky hobby. The king was dead serious about it. His regiment, the Potsdam Giants, consisted of soldiers measuring a minimum of 6 feet, an impressive height for the time when the average height was closer to 5'5". Frederick William went to great lengths to recruit these men, often paying astronomical sums, like 2,000 thalers per head, to secure them. He even resorted to kidnapping in some cases, which is a whole new level of headhunting. The king's fixation was so intense that Voltaire once quipped it was the only thing that could make Frederick's father crack a smile. But amidst these towering figures, young Frederick stood only about 5'3", which perhaps added to the friction between him and his father. Yet, despite the lack of inches and the abundance of poetry books, Frederick would eventually grow into one of Europe's most formidable military tacticians. Maybe it was his father's incessant drilling, or maybe it was his defiant spirit. Whatever the case, Frederick the Great was not going to be just another cog in the Prussian war machine. The world that Frederick grew up in was a tapestry woven from the threads of political ambition, economic necessity, and social rigidity. Prussia was in the process of transforming from a regional power into a European heavyweight, and Frederick William I was the architect of this transformation. His military reforms set the foundation for what would become one of the most efficient and disciplined armies in Europe, a legacy that Frederick would inherit and expand upon, albeit with a few stylistic tweaks. Frederick's early years were also shaped by the economic realities of the time. The Prussian economy was largely agrarian, with the nobility, the Junkers, holding significant power and land. Frederick's father understood that a strong economy was crucial for sustaining a powerful military, and so he implemented various fiscal reforms, cutting court expenses and investing in public infrastructure. This frugality bordered on miserly, but it laid the groundwork for Prussia's future prosperity. Despite the harshness of his upbringing, Frederick managed to find small pockets of joy and escape. Music was one of his great loves, and he became quite the accomplished flutist. He even composed several sonatas and symphonies, using music as both an escape and a form of silent rebellion. In a world dominated by the clatter of sabers and the bark of orders, Frederick found solace in the gentle notes of his flute, a sound that, ironically, would one day accompany the march of his own armies. The tension between Frederick and his father was more than just a familial spat. It was emblematic of a broader clash between the old world and the new, between rigid tradition and the burgeoning spirit of the Enlightenment. Frederick would eventually come to embody this spirit, but not before enduring a childhood that taught him as much about resilience as it did about the art of war. In the end, the young prince who loved poetry and music became a king who would be known as Frederick the Great, a title he earned not just through conquest, but through the cultivation of a cultural and intellectual renaissance in Prussia. But those stories are for another day. For now, let's just say that Frederick's early years were anything but ordinary, a mix of high drama, strict discipline, and the occasional poetic daydream, all set against the backdrop of a rapidly changing Europe. So next time you think about teenage rebellion, remember Frederick. He wasn't just sneaking out to a party. He was plotting a full-scale escape from the iron grip of Prussia's soldier king. And who knows, maybe it was those very same hardships that shaped him into the legendary leader he would become, proving once again that history's greatest figures often have the most complex beginnings. As Frederick ascended the throne in 1740, he traded the shadow of his father's towering expectations for the blinding spotlight of leadership. At just 28, he embraced his new role with a mix of enthusiasm and audacity that would set the stage for his legendary status. Frederick wasn't just taking on the crown. He was ready to reinvent Prussia from the ground up. And oh boy, did he have some spicy ideas. Let's talk potatoes, that humble tuber that Frederick would elevate to culinary stardom. In a move that would make any hipster farmer's market proud, Frederick realized the potato's potential to combat famine and feed his growing kingdom. You see, potatoes were resistant to the harsh Prussian climate and yielded more bounty than grains. But convincing a skeptical populace to embrace this subterranean newcomer was no small feat. Frederick the Great, proving his knack for unconventional problem-solving, reportedly planted royal potato fields and ordered them guarded. The catch: the guards were instructed to turn a blind eye to pilferers. Nothing says must have like a king's forbidden fruit, or in this case, forbidden spud. While Frederick was busy winning hearts with potatoes, he was also reforming the Prussian economy with a surgeon's precision. The new king had a clear vision, a strong, centralized state with a robust economy to support his military ambitions. Frederick was a fiscal wizard, cutting unnecessary expenses and streamlining the tax system to ensure the military coffers were always full. Under his watch, Prussia's revenue grew by an impressive 50% within a decade, an economic miracle that would make modern-day finance ministers weep with envy. But don't be fooled into thinking it was all sunshine and spuds. Frederick's tax policies, while effective, were also a double-edged sword. His tax reforms lightened the load for the peasantry, but kept the nobility, those junkers, with plenty of skin in the game. Their loyalty was crucial, after all, both socially and militarily. This delicate balancing act between reform and tradition was Frederick's tightrope walk, and he navigated it with the finesse of a circus acrobat. Now, let's pivot to Frederick's battlefield antics, which were as audacious as they were strategic. He had inherited one of Europe's most formidable armies, thanks to his father's soldier obsession, and he was determined to make his mark. Frederick's debut in military theatre was the War of Austrian Succession, where he laid claim to the resource-rich province of Silesia. The campaign was a masterclass in rapid maneuver warfare, a term that makes military historians swoon and generals break into cold sweats. But here's the kicker. Frederick's invasion of Silesia was not just a land grab. It was a geopolitical chess move that rattled the European balance of power. Backed by a well-drilled army and a shrewd understanding of his adversary's weaknesses, Frederick's forces struck like lightning. His victory at the Battle of Marwitz in 1741 was a stunning upset, proving that his army wasn't just a parade of giants, but a disciplined force to be reckoned with. The Prussian army's iron discipline and Frederick's daring strategies turned the tide in Prussia's favor, leaving his enemies scratching their powdered wigs. Of course, war isn't all glory and gallantry. It's a messy business, rife with the chaos of battle and the grim tally of human cost. Frederick's campaigns were no exception. While he emerged victorious, the wars left scars on his kingdom, both in terms of human lives and financial strain. But Frederick, ever the pragmatist, believed in the maxim that you can't make an omelette without breaking a few eggs, or in his case, a few thousand. Yet, despite the bloodshed, Frederick's military exploits earned him a reputation as a military genius. His ability to read the battlefield, make split-second decisions, and exploit his enemy's weaknesses became a textbook study for future generals. Napoleon himself, that little Corsican dynamo, once quipped that he would have given anything to have seen Frederick in action. High praise from a man who knew a thing or two about warfare. As the dust settled from his early campaigns, Frederick turned his attention back to domestic matters. He was determined to transform Prussia into a beacon of enlightenment, a cultural powerhouse that would rival the great European capitals. Frederick's reign saw a blossoming of arts and philosophy, a personal passion of his that was as deeply rooted as his love for potatoes and military glory. He invited Voltaire, the French Enlightenment thinker, to his court, hoping to infuse Prussian society with new ideas and intellectual vigor. Their correspondence was a blend of admiration and intellectual sparring, proving that even kings appreciate a good debate. In these early years of his reign, Frederick was crafting a legacy that would endure well beyond his lifetime. He was more than just a king with a penchant for root vegetables and grand battles. He was a complex figure, a tapestry of contradictions who managed to balance the ruthless demands of monarchy with an enlightened vision of progress. And while he was far from perfect, his reign was marked by as much controversy as it was by triumph. Frederick the Great was undeniably a force to be reckoned with. So, as he sat on his throne, perhaps nibbling on a potato and contemplating his next move, Frederick couldn't have known just how far his influence would reach. But one thing was for certain. He was just getting started, and the world was about to witness the full extent of his ambitions. Stay tuned, because the story of Frederick the Great is far from over. As Frederick sat on his throne, perhaps contemplating his next move while nibbling on a potato, he likely had no inkling of the storm brewing on the horizon, the 7 Years' War. This wasn't just any skirmish over disputed lands. Think of it more like the first true world war, a global brawl that sucked in Europe, North America, Africa, India, and the Philippines, all eager to take a swing. Frederick's role. He was the guy who, with the audacity of a poker player on a heart streak, decided to make the first move, setting the stage for a conflict that would test every ounce of his legendary military genius. It's 1756, and Frederick's Prussia is surrounded by a rather unfriendly neighborhood. With Austria, Russia, France, and Sweden all giving him the stink eye, Frederick knew he had to act fast. His opening gambit, a preemptive strike against Saxony, a move that, while aggressive, was as calculated as a chess grandmaster's opening play. You see, Saxony was the key to Austria's backdoor, and by seizing it, Frederick hoped to keep the Austrians off balance. With his characteristic flair for drama, Frederick led his army into Saxony, capturing Dresden and pushing his adversaries onto the defensive. So far, so good. But the 7 Years' War was not going to be a cakewalk, even for someone of Frederick's caliber. The Battle of Labasitz in 1756 served as Frederick's wake-up call. Facing a combined Austrian and Saxon force, He realized that his foes had been hitting the military gym, bulking up their tactics and training. The battle was a bloodbath, with Frederick's forces taking heavy casualties. Yet, in true Frederick fashion, he claimed victory, albeit a Pyrrhic one. The battle's aftermath left his troops exhausted and resources drained, proof that even the best-laid plans can unravel in the chaos of war. Now, let's talk about the epic showdown of Rosbar in 1757, where Frederick pulled off what can only be described as a military magic trick. Facing a Franco-Austrian army nearly twice the size of his own, Frederick executed a daring flanking maneuver that left his enemies bewildered and routed. With just 22,000 men, he inflicted over 10,000 casualties on the opposing force, while his own losses were a mere 548. This victory wasn't just about numbers. It was a masterclass in speed and surprise, the kind that had generals across Europe scribbling notes and scratching their heads. Frederick's success at Rosbar wasn't just a tactical triumph. It was a morale booster for Prussia and a PR nightmare for his foes. The victory sent shockwaves through Europe, earning Frederick a reputation as a military savant. But the war was far from over, and Frederick knew it. He was up against a formidable coalition, and his resources were stretched thinner than a royal courtier's patience at a modern art exhibit. Let's pivot to the Battle of Leuthen, another of Frederick's greatest hits. Taking place in December 1757, this battle saw Frederick outmaneuvering a much larger Austrian force through a brilliant oblique order, a tactic that allowed him to concentrate his forces on a single point of the enemy line. The result, a decisive victory that saw the Austrians fleeing the field, leaving Frederick in control of Silesia once more. His victory at Leuthen wasn't just a testament to his strategic brilliance, it showcased his ability to inspire his troops to perform beyond their limits. The Prussian army, though weary and outnumbered, fought with a ferocity that left the Austrians reeling. However, if you think Frederick spent the war strutting from one victory to another like a peacock at a pigeon convention, think again. 1759 brought him face to face with the harsh reality of war at the Battle of Kunersdorf, where he suffered one of his most crushing defeats. Facing a combined Russian and Austrian force, Frederick's army was decimated, losing over 19,000 men, about half his army, in a single day. The defeat was so catastrophic that Frederick himself considered it the end, reportedly writing a despairing note to his minister, expressing doubt about Prussia's survival. Yet, in the miraculous way that history sometimes unfolds, Prussia did survive. A series of fortuitous events, including the death of Russia's Empress Elizabeth and the ascension of the Prussia-friendly Peter Roman III, pulled Frederick back from the brink. This miracle of the House of Brandenburg, as it came to be known, was a stroke of luck that even Frederick's strategic acumen couldn't have orchestrated. It allowed him to regroup and continue the fight, proving that sometimes even the greatest leaders need a bit of luck alongside their brilliance. And speaking of brilliance, Frederick's ability to maintain his army and kingdom during the war is worth noting. Despite being outnumbered and outgunned, he managed to keep his forces supplied and motivated through a mix of innovative tactics and sheer force of will. His use of rapid marches and surprise attacks kept his enemies off balance, while his keen understanding of logistics ensured that his troops were fed and armed, even when the odds seemed impassable. But let's not sugarcoat it. Frederick's reign during the 7 Years' War wasn't all heroic last stands and cunning maneuvers. His relentless demands on his soldiers and the civilian population took a toll. The Prussian economy was stretched to its limits, with war debts piling up like dirty dishes after a royal banquet. Yet, Frederick's fiscal policies, honed in peacetime, helped sustain his war efforts. His reforms ensured a steady revenue stream, even as the conflict drained resources faster than a leaky bucket. As for Frederick's personal life during the war, well, let's just say the man knew how to multitask. Amidst the chaos, he continued his musical pursuits, often retreating to his tent to play the flute, perhaps finding solace in the melodies amidst the cacophony of war. The flute was more than just a hobby. It was a lifeline, a reminder of the world beyond the battlefield, a world he hoped to return to once the dust settled. And so, as the 7 Years' War raged on, Frederick the Great solidified his legacy. His military genius was undeniable, But it was his resilience in the face of overwhelming odds that truly set him apart. Through victories and defeats, he demonstrated an unwavering commitment to his kingdom and a willingness to adapt and evolve. As the war drew to a close, he had not only defended Prussia's borders, but had also redefined what it meant to be a leader in an era of shifting alliances and global conflict. The war left scars, no doubt, on both Frederick and his nation, but it also paved the way for the transformation of Prussia into a major European power. Frederick's legacy was cemented not just in the annals of military history, but in the cultural and political landscape of Europe, a testament to a king who dared to defy the odds, and in doing so, changed the course of history. Yet, the story of Frederick the Great doesn't end here. His post-war reign was marked by efforts to rebuild and reform, to heal the wounds of conflict, and foster a new era of enlightenment and prosperity. But those tales are for another day. For now, let's leave Frederick, flute in hand, contemplating the peace he fought so fiercely to achieve, a peace that would shape the future of his beloved Prussia and beyond. Frederick the Great, with his flute in hand, might have appeared the picture of a battle-worn king relishing the quiet after a storm. But the man was far from just a military maestro. He was, in fact, a cultural connoisseur with a penchant for all things French. Yes, if there was one thing Frederick adored more than a well-executed flanking maneuver, it was French culture, served with a side of Enlightenment philosophy and a dash of French cuisine. Frederick's Francophilia was no passing whimsy. It was a lifelong affair that permeated every aspect of his reign. You see, while his armies marched to the beat of Prussian drums, Frederick's heart beat to the rhythm of the French Enlightenment. His court at Sanssouci was a veritable shrine to French art, literature, and thought, a beacon of sophistication in the heart of a kingdom better known for its military discipline than its cultural finesse. Let's start with his infamous correspondence with Voltaire, the sharp-tongued philosopher whose wit could slice through pretension like a saber through silk. Their relationship was a fascinating blend of mutual admiration and intellectual sparring, the kind you'd expect from a reality show where two intellectual titans share a shade-owl. Frederick, ever the Francophile, invited Voltaire to his court in 1750, hoping to bask in the glow of his brilliance. But if you think it was all candlelit dinners and philosophical musings, think again. Theirs was a friendship as tempestuous as a Parisian romance, with more drama than a French opera. In their letters, which numbered in the hundreds, Frederick and Voltaire debated everything from politics to poetry. Frederick, who was as much a philosopher-king as a warrior, found in Voltaire a kindred spirit who challenged him to think beyond the confines of his kingdom. Voltaire, on the other hand, saw Frederick as a living embodiment of the Enlightenment ideals he cherished, a monarch willing to wield his quill as deftly as his sword. But their friendship wasn't without its bumps. Voltaire's penchant for satire and criticism often rubbed Frederick the wrong way, leading to heated exchanges that would make even the most seasoned debater break out in a cold sweat. Their relationship eventually soured, with Voltaire leaving Prussia in 1753 under less than amicable circumstances. The philosopher accused Frederick of being a tyrant in philosopher's clothing, while Frederick likened Voltaire to a miserable monkey. Not exactly the way you'd expect two intellectual giants to part ways. Yet, even after their falling out, Frederick continued to cherish Voltaire's works, a testament to the philosopher's lasting influence on his intellectual pursuits. Beyond his philosophical dalliances, Frederick's love for French culture extended to the arts. His court was a hub of artistic activity, a place where the sounds of Bach and the strokes of Rococo painters mingled in harmonious elegance. Frederick was an accomplished flutist and composer, no less, having penned over 100 sonatas and 4 symphonies. His musical talents were not just a hobby, but a vital part of his identity, a counterpoint to the harsh realities of ruling a kingdom constantly at war. And let's not forget Frederick's obsession with French architecture and gardening. Sanssouci, his summer residence, was a masterpiece of Rococo design, a little slice of Versailles tucked away in Potsdam. The palace was more than just a retreat. It was Frederick's sanctuary, a place where he could indulge his artistic passions away from the rigors of statecraft. The gardens, meticulously designed with terraces and fountains, were Frederick's homage to the French formal style, a place where he could stroll and ponder the philosophical questions that intrigued him. But let's pivot to Frederick's views on religion, because this is where things get as spicy as a French sauce. Frederick was a religious skeptic, a man who believed that faith should be a private affair, kept at arm's length from the machinery of state. His motto, "Everyone should be free to seek salvation in their own way," was radical for the time. This was, after all, an era when religious conformity was often enforced at the pointy end of a sword. Frederick's religious tolerance was both genuine and pragmatic. He welcomed Protestants, Catholics, and Jews into his kingdom, understanding that a diverse populace was a strong one. Under his reign, Prussia became a haven for those fleeing religious persecution, a place where you were just as likely to find a synagogue as a Protestant church. Yet, Frederick's tolerance had its limits. He was no fan of religious dogma and had little patience for clerical influence in politics, often clashing with religious leaders who sought to sway public policy. While Frederick's religious skepticism might seem enlightened, it was also tinged with cynicism. He saw religion as a tool for social order rather than a spiritual necessity. In his eyes, the clergy were useful for keeping the populace in line, but they had no place dictating matters of state. This pragmatic approach to religion reflected Frederick's broader philosophy, that a ruler's duty was to ensure the prosperity and stability of his kingdom, even if it meant stepping on a few theological toes. Frederick's personal philosophy was a curious blend of Enlightenment ideals and Machiavellian pragmatism. He was a king who believed in the power of reason and education, yet he was also a realist, acutely aware of the harsh realities of power. His court at Sanssouci was a testament to this duality, a place where intellectual debate thrived alongside the opulence of royal life. It was here that Frederick entertained the brightest minds of his time, from scientists and philosophers to musicians and artists, all the while keeping a wary eye on the shifting sands of European politics. In his later years, Frederick continued to champion the arts and sciences, establishing the Berlin Academy of Sciences and fostering a cultural renaissance that would echo throughout Europe. His patronage of the arts wasn't just about personal passion. It was a strategic move to elevate Prussia's cultural status on the world stage. Under Frederick's watchful eye, Berlin transformed from a provincial backwater into a vibrant cultural capital, a city that rivaled the great metropolises of Europe. Yet, for all his cultural achievements, Frederick remained a man of contradictions. He was a king who could discuss philosophy one moment and command an army the next, a ruler whose love for French culture was matched only by his commitment to Prussian strength. His reign was a delicate balancing act, a testament to a man who understood that power and culture were two sides of the same coin. As the sun set on Frederick's reign, he left behind a legacy that was as complex as it was enduring. He was a warrior and a philosopher, a skeptic and a patron, a king whose love for French culture and Enlightenment ideals forever shaped the course of Prussian history. And while his court life might have seemed eccentric to some, it was a reflection of a man who dared to defy convention, and in doing so, carved his own unique path through the annals of history. But don't think for a moment that Frederick's story ends here. His later years were filled with challenges and triumphs, controversies and reforms. So, stay tuned, because the tale of Frederick the Great is far from over. There's still plenty of intrigue, innovation, and inspiration to explore in the life of one of history's most fascinating figures. As Frederick the Great looked out over his kingdom in his sunset years, he might have wondered how history would remember him, as the enlightened despot who ushered Prussia into the modern age, or the stern autocrat whose iron grip never wavered. Spoiler alert. It's a bit of both, my friends. Frederick left behind a legacy as complex as one of his beloved sonatas, full of surprising movements and dramatic flourishes. First, let's tackle the myth of Frederick the benevolent reformer. Sure, he championed the arts, embraced Enlightenment ideals, and played a mean flute. But let's not romanticize the man too much. He was as much a control freak as he was a cultural patron. His reign saw significant reforms, true, but they often came with a heavy dose of authoritarian oversight. Take his approach to agriculture, for instance. While Frederick's potato crusade is often hailed as visionary, it was also a top-down mandate. The king didn't just suggest potatoes, he ordered them, pushing farmers to plant them by royal decree. Imagine being a Prussian peasant, tending your field under the watchful eye of the local bureaucrat, knowing that your king had a particular fondness for tubers. Now, Frederick was nothing if not practical, especially when it came to law and governance. He streamlined the legal system, consolidating a patchwork of regional laws into a more coherent, unified code. This was the Prussian General Law Code of 1794, a massive undertaking that aimed to bring some order to the legal chaos. Yet, for all its ambition, it was still a product of Frederick's time, rigid, paternalistic, and reflective of his belief in an ordered society. His legal reforms were as much about maintaining control as they were about justice, a reminder that even the most progressive rulers have their limits. But let's shift gears to Frederick's military machine, the powerhouse he left behind. Under his watch, Prussia's military grew into one of Europe's most formidable forces, an engine of efficiency that ran on discipline and sheer willpower. Frederick's armies were the envy of Europe, but they were also a reflection of his relentless pursuit of power. The Prussian military was a double-edged sword, a symbol of national pride, and a drain on resources that kept the kingdom in a perpetual state of readiness, or, as some might say, paranoia. And then there's the matter of his economic legacy. Frederick's reign saw Prussia transition from a regional player to a European heavyweight, thanks in large part to his economic savvy. He promoted industry and trade, encouraged immigration to bolster the population, and invested in infrastructure like roads and canals. His fiscal policies laid the foundation for Prussia's future economic might, but they also demanded sacrifices from his subjects. The king's frugality was legendary, even bordering on miserly at times. Prussian coffers swelled under his reign, but so did the burden on the peasantry and the middle class, who bore the brunt of his tax policies. In Frederick's world, prosperity was a carefully managed balancing act, one that required constant vigilance and occasionally a heavy hand. So, what about the myth of Frederick the Great, the quintessential enlightened monarch? Well, he certainly lived up to the great part, at least in terms of ambition and achievement. But let's debunk the notion of him as a purely benevolent philosopher king. Frederick's reign was as much about power as it was about progress, a finely tuned dance between the carrot and the stick. He was a man of contradictions, a ruler who could pen a stirring sonata one moment and order a military campaign the next. His enlightened ideals were tempered by the harsh realities of ruling a kingdom in a volatile Europe, where alliances shifted as quickly as court gossip. Yet, despite his flaws and foibles, Frederick remains a subject of fascination. Perhaps it's his complexity that draws us in, the way he straddled the line between tyranny and enlightenment, leaving us to ponder the nature of true greatness. Was it his military acumen that defined him, or his cultural patronage? Was it his strategic mind, or his philosophical heart? The truth is, it's all of these things, an intricate tapestry woven from the threads of ambition, genius, and human fallibility. Frederick's legacy, like any good piece of history, is a mix of myth and reality. He was a king who reshaped his world, for better or worse, leaving an indelible mark on the annals of European history. His reign was a symphony of triumphs and tribulations, each note a testament to his enduring influence. And as we play back the soundtrack of his life, we're reminded that greatness is rarely a single note, but a complex melody, full of unexpected harmonies and dissonant chords. In the end, Frederick the Great left Prussia not just as a European powerhouse, but as a testament to the power of vision and tenacity. His story is a reminder that history's most compelling figures are often those who defy simple categorization, who challenge us to reconsider the nature of power and legacy. So, the next time you find yourself pondering the nature of greatness, think of Frederick, the king who dared to dream big and play even bigger, leaving us with a symphony of stories to ponder and debate. As the curtain falls on the life of Frederick the Great, we're left with a legacy as rich and varied as the man himself. From the battlefield to the concert hall, from the halls of power to the gardens of Sanssouci, Frederick's influence echoes through history. He was a king who dared to be different, who embraced the complexities of rule with a mix of audacity and artistry. So, here's to Frederick the Great, a king as multifaceted as the age he helped define, a ruler whose story continues to captivate and inspire. And as we bid him adieu, let's remember that greatness, like history itself, is an ever-evolving narrative, shaped by the deeds and dreams of those who dared to make their mark. Hatshepsut's life could easily have been the script for a royal soap opera, but with more mummies and less orchestrated drama. She was born around 1507 BCE, a date which she would later make sure everyone remembered as the dawn of a new era. Right from her crib, she was part of the Egyptian elite, the new kingdom's glitterati, if you will. Her dad, Thutmose I, was the big kahuna, a pharaoh who extended Egypt's borders further than even a pyramid scheme could imagine. Her mom, Ahmose, was the queen, and not just in title. She had the smarts, the style, and the kind of political savvy that made Cleopatra look like a gossip columnist. Now, being the daughter of a pharaoh isn't all gold anklets and chariot rides. It comes with more strings attached than a harp in the Nile Delta. Hatshepsut had to navigate a world where the pharaoh was considered a living god, which meant family dinners were probably a divine affair. She had siblings, of course, but in a twist worthy of an ancient plotline, it would be her half-brother Thutmose Roman II who'd step up as the next pharaoh. What's a girl to do? Marry him, obviously. And just like that, Hatshepsut became queen, which in those days was as much about political strategy as it was about matrimonial bliss, or lack thereof. Her marriage to Thutmose Roman II was less happily ever after and more strategically ever after. Thutmose Roman II was reportedly not the sharpest spear in the barracks, and he had the charisma of a limestone block. Yet he held the title, and that was what mattered. In the royal playbook, this was a classic power move. Hatshepsut wasn't just any queen, she was the queen regent. When Thutmose Roman II kicked the bucket after a reign as short as an Egyptian winter, she was poised to play the long game. Enter Thutmose Roman III, the son of Thutmose Roman II by a lesser wife, and not just a minor footnote in our history scroll. Picture this, a toddler with a crown, scepter, and probably a nanny who deserved a raise. Hatshepsut was supposed to be the regent for this pint-sized pharaoh until he grew up. But with a mind sharper than a pyramid point, she saw an opportunity. Why settle for regency when the throne could be yours? Thus began her audacious bid for power, a move as brazen as building a pyramid in your backyard. Hatshepsut's strategies were as layered as an onion, and they could make Machiavelli sit up and take notes. First, she made sure everyone knew she was the daughter of the god Ammon, not just the daughter of some mere mortal pharaoh. She even went as far as to have inscriptions crafted that detailed how Ammon himself had decreed her birth. You see, in ancient Egypt, divine legitimacy was the ultimate game changer. If you could convince people you were chosen by the gods, you could get away with, well, anything. But Hatshepsut didn't just sit on her laurels or her throne. She went full pharaoh, which was unheard of for a woman. She wore the pharaoh's false beard, a fashion statement that screamed authority more than any pair of designer sandals. She even donned the traditional male pharaoh's kilt. Talk about breaking the glass ceiling, or in this case, the limestone one. It was a calculated move to be taken seriously, to embody the role fully, and to remind everyone that she was the boss. Her rise to power was supported by a cadre of loyalists, including Senenmut, her right-hand man, and possibly her confidant in more ways than one. Senenmut was an architect, a steward, and the guy who probably knew where all the bodies were buried, literally. He was the kind of ally everyone needs, loyal, competent, and capable of pulling off grand projects, like constructing her temple at Deir el-Bahri. This was no small feat, given that it stands as one of the architectural wonders of ancient Egypt. What makes Hatshepsut's story so compelling are the lengths she went to ensure her legacy, a legacy that was almost wiped out by those who followed. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. At this point, she was still in the thick of it, maneuvering like a master chess player in a world built on power and prestige. Her claim to the throne wasn't just about personal ambition. It was about stability in a kingdom that could easily descend into chaos with a pharaoh not yet out of diapers. So, Hatshepsut held the reins of power with a grip as firm as the Sphinx's gaze over Giza. She wasn't just a placeholder. She was a ruler in her own right, with a vision that went beyond her own reign. Her story is one of audacity and intelligence, a testament to what a sharp mind can achieve even in an era dominated by men. But as we'll see, the road to power is never smooth, and the sands of time have a way of burying even the boldest of legacies. Stay tuned, because the twists in Hatshepsut's tale are just beginning. As Hatshepsut maneuvered her way through the perilous landscape of ancient Egyptian politics, she wasn't just sitting back and basking in her newfound power. Oh no, she had grand designs, literally. Enter the temple at Deir el-Bahri, her architectural magnum opus, a structure so grand it could make the Colossus of Rhodes look like a garden gnome. Nestled in the cliffs of Luxor, this temple wasn't just a place for worship. It was a massive stone billboard that screamed, "I'm the real deal, folks." The temple was a multi-tiered wonder of the world, flaunting colonnaded terraces that seemed to float against the limestone cliffs. It was like an ancient Egyptian Instagram post, capturing Hatshepsut's reign in a grand, panoramic shot. And let's not forget the lush gardens filled with exotic plants and trees, a subtle reminder of her trade prowess. This wasn't just any garden-variety Pharaoh's monument. It was an audacious statement of power and legitimacy, an architectural mic drop in stone and mortar. Speaking of trade, let's talk about her savvy economic maneuvers that would give Wall Street titans a run for their money. Hatshepsut's expedition to the land of Punt, possibly modern-day Somalia or Eritrea, was the ancient equivalent of a shopping spree at the world's most exclusive market. The mission secured valuable goods like gold, ebony, and myrrh, not to mention some truly exotic animals that would make a modern zoo blush. This was more than just a commercial venture. It was a declaration of Egypt's might and reach. When you return from a trip with stacks of gold and sacks of incense, people tend to take you seriously. The Punt expedition was a blockbuster hit, and Hatshepsut knew how to milk it for all it was worth. She plastered the walls of her Deir el-Bahri temple with vivid depictions of the journey, a visual diary that left no doubt about her prowess as a ruler. These images were more than just ancient PowerPoint slides. They were a calculated move to reinforce her status as a legitimate pharaoh, a ruler chosen by the gods and proven by deeds. After all, in a world where divine endorsement was the ultimate currency, she was making sure her coffers were full. Now, let's not forget about her propaganda machine, which was as slick as they come. Hatshepsut was a master of spin, a pharaoh who could make even the most mundane royal duties sound like epic tales of valor. Take her claims about divine birth, for instance. According to inscriptions, her father wasn't just Thutmose I. It was Ammon, the king of gods himself. She wove a tale of celestial paternity that would make Zeus nod in approval. This wasn't just mythology. It was political strategy with a divine sheen. Hatshepsut's reign was a masterclass in how to build an image, both literally and figuratively. She didn't just rule. She curated her legacy with the precision of a pharaoh who understood the power of narrative. Her story was one of transformation, from queen regent to full-fledged pharaoh, a woman who donned the traditional false beard not just as a fashion statement, but as a symbol of her authority. In a world dominated by male rulers, she was rewriting the playbook, one monumental inscription at a time. Yet, for all her accomplishments, Hatshepsut's tale wasn't without its shadows. Her rise to power was as fraught with tension as it was with triumph. The young Thutmose Roman III, her stepson, was growing up in the wings, and while he was busy learning the ropes, Hatshepsut was weaving a web of influence and control. This was no bedtime story. It was a high-stakes Game of Thrones, with the future of Egypt hanging in the balance. But let's not get too ahead of ourselves. At this juncture, Hatshepsut was at the height of her power, commanding respect both at home and abroad. Her reign was a testament to what a brilliant mind and a strategic outlook could achieve, even in an era where women were more often seen as royal arm candy than rulers. Her story is one of boldness and ingenuity, a narrative that continues to captivate us, even as the sands of time threaten to obscure her legacy. So, stay tuned, because as history has shown, the plot is far from over in this ancient tale of ambition and legacy. As Hatshepsut sat at the pinnacle of her power, basking in the glow of her own accomplishments, the political landscape of ancient Egypt was less of a sunny riverside and more of a swampy quagmire. The intrigue and drama that surrounded her court could rival any modern-day political thriller, with power plays and whispered conspiracies lurking in every shadowy corner of the palace. Let's start with Thutmose Roman III, the boy king who was technically the rightful ruler, but found himself sidelined while his stepmother wore the crown. Now, if you think growing up in the shadow of such a formidable stepmom was a piece of cake, think again. There he was, wading in the wings, while Hatshepsut was making diplomatic moves and monumental decisions that would shape Egypt's future. It's like being the understudy to a Broadway star who never misses a performance. Frustrating, to say the least. However, it wasn't all silent resentment and sulking. Thutmose Roman III was no fool. He spent those early years honing his skills, learning from the best military minds of the time, and preparing for the day when the reins of power would finally be handed to him. Meanwhile, Hatshepsut, ever the political maestro, kept him close but never too close, ensuring he was involved just enough to learn but not enough to challenge her authority. It was a delicate balance, like juggling scorpions. One wrong move, and well, you get the point. Then there was Senenmut, Hatshepsut's right-hand man and the ancient world's answer to a Swiss army knife. He was her architect, her steward, and possibly her confidant in ways that have historians endlessly speculating. Senenmut managed massive construction projects, including the jaw-dropping temple at Deir el-Bahri, and had a knack for making the impossible seem effortless. His influence in the court was undeniable, and it was rumored that his bond with Hatshepsut went beyond the professional, which, let's face it, makes for a juicy subplot. Senenmut's rise was emblematic of Hatshepsut's reign, strategic and precise. He was the kind of guy who could turn a block of limestone into a masterpiece, and his loyalty to Hatshepsut was unwavering. But as with any court filled with ambition and power, there were whispers of discontent. Some saw his influence as overreaching, others thought his proximity to the queen was inappropriate. It was the ancient equivalent of office gossip, but with a lot more at stake. Now, let's tackle the ancient elephant in the room, Hatshepsut's attire. Much has been made about her choice to wear a pharaoh's false beard and masculine attire. In a land where image was everything, this was more than just a fashion statement, it was a power move. By donning the traditional male regalia, Hatshepsut was sending a clear message. She wasn't just playing at being a ruler, she was the real deal. This wasn't about gender bending for the sake of it. It was about embodying the role and all the authority that came with it. In a society where the pharaoh was both a political and religious figure, Hatshepsut knew that appearances mattered as much as actions. But let's not romanticize this too much. The reality was that, as a female ruler in a male-dominated society, she had to go above and beyond to prove her legitimacy. It's a harsh truth that even when you're breaking glass ceilings, or limestone ones, in this case, there's always a layer of skepticism to shatter. Hatshepsut's choice of attire was as much about survival as it was about power. As for her eventual disappearance from the historical records, well, that's where things get murkier than the Nile during flood season. After her death, Thutmose Roman III finally took the throne, and it seems he had a bit of an axe to grind, or more accurately, a chisel. In a move that could rival any modern-day rebranding effort, he set about erasing Hatshepsut's legacy, literally chiseling her name and image off monuments and replacing them with his own. Talk about history being written by the victors. Why did he do it? Theories abound. Some suggest it was to legitimize his own rule by erasing any trace of a female pharaoh, which would have been seen as an anomaly. Others believe it was a personal vendetta, clearing the slate of a stepmother's overshadowing reign. Whatever the reason, it's a stark reminder of how easily history can be rewritten, and how fragile legacy truly is. Yet, despite these efforts, Hatshepsut's story didn't fade into oblivion. The sands of time may have tried to bury her, but like a well-preserved mummy, her legacy has endured. Modern archaeology has pieced together the fragments of her story, revealing a ruler who was as shrewd as she was ambitious. Her reign was marked by prosperity and peace, a golden era that stood in contrast to the chaos before and after her time. Hatshepsut's tale is one of calculated audacity and strategic brilliance. She played the long game in a world where short-term thinking often reigned supreme. Her diplomatic efforts extended beyond Egypt's borders as she forged alliances and secured trade routes that bolstered Egypt's economy. It was a reign of stability, a time when Egypt's coffers were filled with gold and its people prospered. And yet, for all her accomplishments, her story remains a cautionary tale of how power can be as fleeting as it is intoxicating. In the end, Hatshepsut's legacy is a testament to the complexities of history, a reminder that even the most powerful can be relegated to footnotes by those who follow. But as we continue to uncover the truths of her reign, we're reminded that history isn't just about what was, it's about how we choose to remember it. And as long as we keep telling her story, Hatshepsut's legacy will continue to stand as tall as the monuments she left behind. So, as we delve further into the chronicles of ancient Egypt, stay tuned for more tales of ambition, intrigue, and the indomitable spirit of those who dared to defy the odds. As we meander through the annals of history, the aftermath of Hatshepsut's reign reads like a scriptwriter's dream. Drama, intrigue, and a dash of historical revisionism. The moment Hatshepsut exited stage left, likely around 1458 BCE, her stepson Thutmose Roman III seized the throne with the enthusiasm of a kid finding the last piece of Halloween candy. And with that, the erasure began. It was less about a fresh start, and more about a historical whiteout session. You see, Thutmose Roman III wasn't just content with wearing the double crown. Oh no, he had a whole legacy to rechisel. Picture this. Monuments that once celebrated Hatshepsut's reign found themselves subjected to an ancient form of Photoshop. Her images were meticulously chiseled off temple walls, her name erased from cartouches like a pharaoh's version of the ultimate unfriending. This was history's equivalent of a scorched earth policy, with Thutmose Roman III determined to make it seem like his reign was as uninterrupted as the Nile's flow. But why the vendetta? Theories abound, like ancient grains scattered in the wind. Some historians suggest that Thutmose Roman III, now all grown up and sporting a crown of his own, felt the need to assert his legitimacy. Having a female predecessor didn't exactly fit the narrative of a strong, unbroken line of male pharaohs, a detail as inconvenient as a sandstorm at an outdoor festival. Others speculate that it was a personal grudge, a bit of dynastic housekeeping that involved sweeping Hatshepsut's achievements under a very large, very sandy rug. Whatever the motivation, the result was the same. Hatshepsut's legacy was buried deeper than a pharaoh's tomb. Her obelisks, once towering symbols of her reign, were hidden behind walls, like forgotten trophies in an attic. The irony here is thicker than the walls of her own temple at Deir el-Bahri. Thutmose Roman III, despite his best efforts, couldn't completely erase her story. Fast forward a few millennia, and archaeology comes to the rescue like an ancient Indiana Jones. Into the 19th century, when the sands of Egypt were as much a playground for archaeologists as they were for camels. Amidst the dust and the echoes of time, Hatshepsut's story began to resurface. It was like piecing together a jigsaw puzzle where half the pieces had been chewed by a particularly enthusiastic pet. And what a jigsaw it was! Archaeologists, wielding trowels and a thirst for discovery, began to uncover the fragments of Hatshepsut's reign. Her temple at Deir el-Bahri, with its grand terraces and intricate reliefs, stood as a testament to her architectural prowess. The rock-cut masterpiece, long hidden under layers of neglect, was a revelation, a reminder that history, no matter how buried, has a way of clawing its way back to the surface. But piecing together Hatshepsut's story was no small feat. It was a detective story that would have made Sherlock Holmes proud, with historians poring over inscriptions like cryptic messages from the past. Each hieroglyph was a clue, each fragment a piece of the grand narrative that had been all but erased. The process was painstaking, like reconstructing a novel from scattered pages found in a flea market. Through these efforts, a clearer picture of Hatshepsut's reign emerged. Her achievements weren't just footnotes in the grand Egyptian saga. They were chapters of innovation, diplomacy, and economic savvy. Her expedition to Punt, once depicted in vibrant reliefs, was unearthed as one of the earliest recorded trade missions, a venture that brought wealth and exotic goods to Egypt's doorstep. Her domestic policies, too, began to shine a light on a reign that was as stable as it was prosperous. Under her leadership, Egypt enjoyed a period of peace and economic growth, a far cry from the turmoil that often characterized pharaonic transitions. It was a golden age of sorts, with Hatshepsut steering the ship of state with a steady hand and a vision that stretched beyond her own lifetime. Yet, for all this rediscovery, the myth and reality of Hatshepsut's reign continue to intermingle like the currents of the Nile. The allure of a powerful female pharaoh, one who dared to defy the conventions of her time, remains as captivating as ever. Her story is a blend of fact and legend, a tapestry woven from threads of ambition, power, and the relentless passage of time. And so, as we delve deeper into the layers of history, Hatshepsut's tale offers us more than just a glimpse into the past. It provides a mirror to our own narratives of power and legacy. It is a story that reminds us that history is not a static record, but a living, breathing tapestry, ever subject to the interpretations and discoveries of those who dare to look beyond the surface. As we continue to uncover the fragments of Hatshepsut's reign, her story remains unfinished, a testament to the complexities of history and the enduring quest to understand the past. In a world that often seeks to simplify and categorize, her legacy stands as a reminder that the truth is rarely black and white. More often, it is as nuanced and layered as the limestone cliffs of Deir el-Bahari. Stay tuned, because the saga of Hatshepsut is far from over, and the next chapters promise to be as riveting as those that came before. The story of Hatshepsut, the pharaoh who dared to defy the norms, is as mesmerizing as a mirage in the Sahara. Her legacy, buried and unearthed, debated and celebrated, continues to echo through the corridors of time like an ancient melody that refuses to fade. As we unravel the threads of her reign, we find a tapestry rich with both triumph and controversy, a narrative that challenges our perceptions of power, gender, and historical memory. Hatshepsut's reign was a golden era for Egypt, not just in the literal sense of flourishing trade and economic prosperity, but also culturally and politically. She was a visionary who understood that a pharaoh's strength lay not just in conquest, but in the prosperity of their people. Under her leadership, Egypt's trade networks expanded like a well-spun spider web, reaching as far as the fabled land of Punt. This wasn't just about acquiring exotic goods and wealth, though the ebony, gold, and incense certainly didn't hurt. It was about establishing Egypt as a formidable force on the international stage, a kingdom that could flex its muscles not just through military might, but through economic clout. This expansion of trade routes was akin to laying down the ancient Silk Road. Long before that was even a glimmer in a trader's eye. But Hatshepsut's influence extended beyond the economy. Her architectural endeavors, particularly the magnificent temple at Deir el-Bahari, were not just expressions of religious devotion or personal vanity, but strategic moves to cement her legacy. The temple, with its grand colonnades and terraces, was a visual testament to her reign, a declaration in stone that said, "I was here, and I made a difference." These projects employed thousands, boosting the local economy and reinforcing her image as a benevolent ruler. It was a masterstroke of leadership, blending the divine with the practical, ensuring that her name would echo through the ages. And echo it did, though not without interruption. The attempt to erase her from history was as futile as trying to sweep the desert sands back into place. Thutmose Roman III efforts to obliterate her memory only served to add a layer of intrigue to her story, like a plot twist in a gripping novel that keeps readers turning pages well into the night. His actions, however, highlight a harsh reality, the precariousness of power and the lengths to which successors will go to rewrite history in their favor. It's a tale as old as time, where the victors not only write the history books, but also decide which chapters to erase. Yet for all the chiseling and rewriting, Hatshepsut's legacy survived, preserved by the very stones that were meant to silence her. The rediscovery of her story in the 19th century ignited a fascination that has only grown with time. Today, she is hailed as a pioneering ruler, a woman who wielded power with the deftness of a scribe's pen and the strength of a pharaoh's scepter. Her gender, once used against her, is now part of what makes her story so compelling, a testament to her audacity in a world that expected women to play supporting roles rather than lead. The ongoing debate among historians about Hatshepsut's significance underscores the complexity of her legacy. Was she a usurper who overstepped her bounds, or a savior who brought stability and prosperity to Egypt? The truth, as is often the case, likely lies somewhere in between, in the grey areas that resist neat categorization. What cannot be denied is her impact on future generations, both in her time and beyond. Her story resonates with those who challenge conventions and push boundaries, a beacon for those who dare to defy the status quo. Hatshepsut's story captivates the imagination not just because of what she achieved, but because of what she represents. The potential to transcend the limitations imposed by society, to carve one's own path in the face of adversity. Her tale is a reminder that the narratives we construct about our past are as much about the present as they are about history. As we continue to peel back the layers of her life and reign, we are reminded that history is not static, but a living dialogue between the past and the present. In the end, Hatshepsut's legacy is a mosaic of ambition, ingenuity, and resilience. It's a story that refuses to be silenced, a narrative that continues to evolve, as we uncover new fragments and interpretations. Her reign, though marked by the challenges of legitimacy and gender, remains a testament to the power of vision and determination. As modern-day historians and enthusiasts delve into the sands of Egypt, Hatshepsut stands as a symbol of what it means to lead with courage and conviction in a world that often underestimates those who dare to be different. So as we wrap up our journey through the life and legacy of Hatshepsut, we invite you to reflect on the stories that shape our understanding of history. In her tale, we find not just lessons from the past, but inspiration for the present, a reminder that even in the face of erasure, the truth has a way of rising, as enduring as the monument she left behind. And with that, our exploration of Egypt's bold pharaoh comes to a close, though the echoes of her reign will continue to resonate long after the final chapter is read.